dark. Scratch builder. old ass balsa. I got these airplane models from the 40s and 50s. You could tell the old balsa because it's like furry. And then the new style with farmed balsa, it's not furry at all. On this one for a second.
Know that the state of New York holds more than half of all the surface fresh water in the United States, a reserve so vast it could supply entire countries for centuries. That within its borders rises the oldest mountain in the nation, formed over 2 billion years ago, long before dinosaurs ever existed, and that its landscape was shaped by colossal glaciers, leaving scars that are still visible today. New York is not just skyscrapers and bright lights,
Not just Texas
water,
and
primal rock, and a land forged by forces far older than civilization itself. Get ready, because today you're about to discover 35 incredible facts
New
about
York.
the state of
We're
New
not
York
just
that will
taxes and
completely
government
change the way you
overreach.
understand the true power of the Northeastern United States. 35. The massive scale of the Adirondack Park. The first thing you have to understand about New York geography is that the Adirondack Park is absolutely immense. My first visit to a standard state park with a few hiking trails and a gift shop, but this place is 6 million acres of protected wilderness. Put that into perspective for you. It is larger than Yellowstone, Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Glacier, and Great Smoky Mountains National Parks combined. It's roughly the size of the entire state of Vermont. Unlike a traditional national park, it is a unique patchwork of public and private land, often referred to as a fragmented forest. Because it was created in 1892 to protect the state water supply, it is constitutionally protected to remain forever wild. You could get lost in its thousands of lakes and mountains, never see the same tree twice. It is truly the green heart of the Northeast. 34, the secret maritime border with Rhode Island. Most people can name the states that border New York easily enough, mentioning New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont. However, very few people realize that New York actually shares a maritime border with the smallest state in the Union, Rhode Island. If you stand on the tip of Montauk Point on Long Island and look out over the Atlantic Ocean, you are staring toward a watery boundary line that was settled in the late 20th century. This border exists in the middle of the Block Island Sound. It is a tiny stretch of water where the jurisdiction of the Empire State meets the Ocean State. It is one of those geographical quirks that makes for a great trivia question because the two states do not share a single inch of dry land, yet they are neighbors in the eyes of the Coast Guard. Before continuing, be sure to subscribe and leave a like to keep discovering the strange and incredible geography of our entire country. 33. The hidden depths of Lake Ontario. While New York is famous for its rivers, it also possesses a massive coastline along 2 of the 5 Great Lakes. Lake Ontario is particularly fascinating because it is the smallest of the Great Lakes by surface area, but it is surprisingly deep and holds an incredible volume of water, reaching a maximum depth of 802 feet, which means you could stack the Eiffel Tower inside of it and still have water over the top. Because it sits at the base of the Niagara Falls, it receives all the drainage from the other 4 lakes before sending it out to the Atlantic Ocean via the St. Lawrence River. When I stood on the shore in Rochester, I felt like I was looking at the ocean because the horizon just disappears into the blue. It contains enough water to cover the entire state in several feet of liquid. 32. The Arctic tundra of Mount Marcy. If you climb to the highest point in New York, which is the summit of Mount Marcy at 5,344 feet, you will find a landscape that looks like it belongs in northern Canada or Greenland. The very top of the mountain is home to a rare alpine tundra regulates the temperature of the surrounding hills. 30, the jurisdictional jigsaw of Liberty God. This is one of my favorite geographical head scratches. While the Statue of Liberty is the universal symbol of New York City, the island it sits on has a very complicated relationship with the state of New Jersey.
Well,
The
it's-
island is a slave of New York, meaning it is legally part of the state of New York, even though it is completely surrounded by the waters of New Jersey. This was settled by a compact in 1834, but the drama did not end there. In 1998, the Supreme Court ruled that while the original natural island belongs to New York, all the filled land created by humans over the years actually belongs to New Jersey. This created a situation where you can stand on one part of the small island and technically be in a different state than if you walked 20 feet to the left. 29. Grand Canyon of the East. If you travel to western New York, you will find Letchworth State Park, which is famously known as the Grand Canyon of the East. The Genesee River has spent thousands of years carving a massive gorge through the rock, with cliffs that rise up to 600 feet high. It is a spectacular sight that looks nothing like the rolling hills or flat plains you might expect in the region. There are 3 major waterfalls within the canyon, and the river twists and turns through the deep rock like a snake. I have hiked many canyons in the western United States, and Letchworth holds its own with its sheer verticality and the lush forest that fills the edges of the abyss. Geology here reveals layers of shale and limestone that tell the story of an ancient sea that once covered the entire area. 28, the tallest waterfall in the Northeast. Many people assume that Niagara Falls is the tallest waterfall in New York, but that is actually a common misconception. While Niagara is certainly the most powerful and famous, Titanic Falls near Ithaca actually has a higher vertical drop. Titanic Falls plunges 215 feet over a massive amphitheater of rock, making it 33 feet taller than the American side of Niagara Falls. It is the highest single drop waterfall east of the Rocky Mountains. When I first visited, the sheer height of the falls took my breath away. It feels like the water is falling in slow motion because it has so far to travel before hitting the base of the cliff. The surrounding gorge walls are even higher. Trinidad, in the middle of the East River, right across from the United Nations headquarters, sits a tiny patch of land called ju88 Island. Geographically, it is the smallest island in Manhattan, and it did not even exist before the 1890s. It was created entirely by accident using rubble and debris and the construction of a trolley tunnel. It is technically known as Belmont Island, but it was renamed in honor of the former United Nations Secretary General. Today, it is a protected sanctuary for migratory birds and is strictly off limits to humans. I love the idea that in one of the mountain ranges on the planet are slowly being worn down by the relentless forces of erosion over millions of years. The Adirondacks are growing at a rate of about 2 millimeters every year. This happens because the Earth doesn't use this region as usually did. Rocks leave from the mantle, push the lithosphere upward like a giant slow-moving bubble. It is one of the few places in the entire world where you can stand on a mountain and know that you are technically higher than you were the year before. This makes them much younger in their current shape than the surrounding terrain, even though the rock at the core is over 1 billion years old. Remember to subscribe. Learning amazing information about each state in our beautiful country. 10. The easternmost anomaly is Fisher's Island. Ask most people where the easternmost point of the state is. They will confidently point you toward the lighthouse at Montauk Point on the tip of Long Island. However, they would be geographically mistaken. If you look at a detailed map of the water sitting between New York and Connecticut, you will find a 9-mile-long strip of land called Fisher's Island. This island is technically a part of the town of Southhold in Suffolk County, New York, but it is situated much closer to the coast of Connecticut. Now, the only way to reach the island is by taking a ferry from New London, Connecticut. It is so isolated from the rest of the Empire State that the residents have a long history of being more connected to their northern neighbors. It is a lonely, beautiful outpost of New York geography that sits further east than any other point of the state, standing guard over the entrance to the Long Island Sound. 9. The eternal flame of Chestnut Ridge. In the town of Orchard Park, tucked away inside Chestnut Ridge Park, there is a geological feature that looks like something out of a fantasy novel. Located behind a small waterfall is a natural grotto that contains a flickering flame that stays lit almost all year round. This is not a magic trick or a human invention, but a rare geological occurrence where natural gas leaks through the shale rock. The gas is produced by ancient organic matter trapped thousands of feet underground. It seeps through tiny cracks created by tectonic activity in the earth. Because the flame is tucked into a recess behind the falling water, it is protected from the wind and the spray, allowing it to burn indefinitely unless it is intentionally extinguished. I have stood there in the damp mist watching fire. Water exists in a perfect flowing balance that feels totally supernatural. 8. The defiance of gravity in Middlesex. Geography is not always as straightforward as it seems on a topographic map, and nowhere is that more apparent than on a specific stretch of road in the town of Middlesex. This is one of the world's famous gravity hills, where the landscape creates a powerful and convincing optical illusion. Bring your car to a complete stop at the bottom of this hill, put the gear in neutral, it will appear to roll back uphill toward the summit. I have tried this several times, and even though your logical brain knows that gravity should be pulling you down, your minds tell you that you are moving against the laws of physics. It is actually just the way the surrounding trees, the lack of a clear horizon, and the slope of the ground trick your brain into misinterpreting the true level of the ground. It is a geographical prank played by the
This one it should be.
senses. 7. The boiling pot of Kanajahar. If we travel to the village of Kanajahar in the heart of the Mohawk Valley, you will encounter a geological feature that looks like a giant's bathtub carved into the earth. Known as the boiling pot, these are massive glacial potholes that were ground into the limestone bedrock at the end of the last ice age. The massive glaciers began to melt, swirling torrents of water carrying heavy stones and debris, acting like a high-powered drill, spinning in place and grinding deep circular holes into the stone. Some of these potholes are over 20 feet deep and perfectly smooth. The name of the village itself is derived from a Mohawk word that means the pot that washes itself, referring to the way the water swirls inside these stone basins. It is a spectacular and permanent reminder of the sheer power of the ancient floods that once reshaped the entire valley. 6. Changing spires of chimney bluffs. Along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, there is a landscape that looks more like the rugged badlands of the western United States than the lush forests of the northeast. The chimney bluffs are dramatic, razor-sharp spires of clay and gravel that rise nearly 200 feet above the water. These formations are actually the remains of a drumlin, which is a long hill of glacial debris left behind by the retreating ice sheet thousands of years ago. Over time, the powerful waves of the lake and the harsh winter weather have eroded the side of the hill, leaving behind these incredible jagged towers. The geography here is in a state of constant change. Every major rainstorm or lake surge carves away more of the soft clay, meaning the bluffs look different every single year. It is a
for a little under 620 days, 24 hours of the bar runs for 43,000 miles. But what if I told you that in 1908, 6 cars competed in a race around the world from New York to Paris for a total distance of 20,000 miles? The 1908 race from New York to Paris was an uninhabitable 6-month journey that brought the United States, France, Germany, and Italy together. And it's a race that remains one of the longest in human history, featuring dangerous road conditions, an armed standoff straight out of an action movie, infighting among the teams, a full-on cheating scandal, and an ending that's almost too outrageous to believe. The finish so manifestly unbelievable, you would get laughed out of Hollywood for putting it in your script. So, who won the race? How on earth did they even plan to get from New York to Paris in the first place? Luckily, this story won't take 6 months to tell, so strap in, because where we're going, we don't need words. Well, actually, we do, but because it's an this is RCR Series. New York to Paris, the legendary race. On February 12, 1908, more than 250,000 people lined the streets of Times Square to witness the beginning of the greatest race known to man. Co-sponsored by the New York Times and the French newspaper Le Temps, the race from New York to Paris seemed to exist solely for bragging rights, and a 1,400-pound trophy cast in bronze. Yeah, I'm not sure what they were really supposed to do with that. Maybe melt it down, sell it for money. But whatever, it may not have been much, but it was something. But to be honest, there was more in it for the newspapers than for the racers themselves, as the publications stood to make a lot of money off of race coverage. There would also be a promotional benefit to the auto industry as well. Races like these could provide a shot in the arm to boost sales and make cars more desirable, and even standardize them in the eyes of the public, where in some areas people hadn't even seen a car up close before. Now, there was already proof that this worldwide race concept could work. A race had been run from Peking to Paris the year before, in a journey that made international headlines for being won by an Italian aristocrat. But this would be an even bigger race, with truly international market. So, calculating the distance of the trip was estimated to be roughly 19,877 miles, and it would take contestants from the starting line in New York City to the first checkpoint in Chicago, Illinois, and then south towards Omaha, Nebraska, and then west towards the southern chain of San Francisco, California, at which point the cars and racers would travel by ship to Seattle, Washington, and then to Valdez, Alaska. They would then drive across Alaska until they reached the Bering Strait. Since the race was planned to begin in winter, the assumption was that the Bering Strait would be completely frozen. And so the drivers were expected to drive across the frozen water to get to the next phase of the race, which would basically be a journey across Eastern Asia towards the US. A daunting trip with a daunting price tag, as the cost for each participant was approximately $10,000, which comes out to over $351,000 in 2025. Now, let's talk about the teams. They were as follows. Italy was represented by driver ju88, although some sources list his name as ju88. He operated a car like the Italian automaker Just. His partners for this was the mechanic Heinrich Halle and 21-year-old poet and journalist Antonio Scarfolio, whose father had forbidden him from participating in this until Scarfolio threatened to drive a motorboat across the Atlantic if he let him compete. What a foul threat. A German news publication, that sponsored a car that was built specifically for Marines by automaker Protos just 2 months earlier. It was driven by 31-year-old Lieutenant Hans Kogan, who requested a special leave of absence from the 15th Prussian Infantry to represent Germany in the contest. Now, Kogan had high hopes as he supposedly believed that a victory in the race would lead to a military promotion, since he had been a second lieutenant for a while. He also put a lot of his own money into preparation for the race, so he arguably had the most skill out of anybody actually driving this race. Meanwhile, France would have 3 entrants in competition. The first was ju88 de Saint-Chaffet, a 36-year-old aristocrat who drove a car made by automaker ju88, and his team included Alphonse Bertrand and a Norwegian adventurer named Hans Hendrik Hansen, who was said to have sailed a Viking ship to the North Pole with no crew, just all on his own, which sounds like something lifestyle influencers would try to do and quit after they ran out of pipeline punch flavored monster. And let's talk about this French aristocrat Saint-Chaffet, and don't worry about having to remember all of these names. I'll be constantly reminding you of these. You see, Saint-Chaffet didn't really have the greatest reputation to start with. Not only had he declared himself a commissioner of the police, he made the dubious claim of having had a role in charting the route the race was to take. Although I guess it isn't that dubious, considering the man was known for hosting extravagant race events back in Europe. Except, well, that wasn't really a good thing. Saint-Chaffet had become internationally infamous for having organized a motorboat race across the Mediterranean, in which every single boat sank to the bottom of the sea. And while I can't find evidence that anybody died, nobody died at Firefest either. But it didn't really help the reputation of Ja Rule and Billy What's-His-Face either. So yeah, a controversial entry, to say the least. But Saint-Chaffet was arguably less controversial than France's second entry, a motorboat driven by a 41-year-old baron named Charles Godin. He had competed in the legendary Tour de Paris race before, but didn't finish because he was arrested for conning a Dutch consulate into giving him gas money with false promises that his sponsor would pay them back, which proves that even 118 years ago, the world still had gas witches. For whatever reason that I cannot explain, Godard was allowed to ride along for the final leg of the Tour de Paris, but then he tried to forcibly take control of the wheel from his car's new driver in order to finish the race himself, at which point police had him removed from the vehicle and sent off to serve his 18-month prison sentence. And I know, you're thinking, if he was sentenced to prison for 18 months in 1907, how is he here, captaining a 3-man team for France 6 months later? And honestly, I don't know. I'm really trying to figure out, like, what to get off the smoke was I wanted to somebody to get off I don't know. He's here now. Could be his race. Maybe the law just works differently over there. Now, by comparison, France's third entry was practically a classic, as French automaker César Nobel would be represented by 32-year-old Auguste Ash, who was crew, a pair of 24-year-old mechanics, which might sound young, but you gotta remember age inflation. 24 then is basically 37. Last but not least, there was the United States entry, and the story is important because up until 3 days before the race, there was no United States entry, and with good reason. Major companies like Ford and Cadillac didn't feel the reward of additional publicity was worth risking the shame of a potential loss, so America would need a smaller army to step up to the plate. That was kind of a big ask due to the expense involved in competing. Enter a man by the name of Edwin Ross Thomas, who was the proprietor of the Thomas Flyer. Thomas figured competing in the race to help get the companies out there and boost sales numbers. So the 1907 Thomas Flyer was then officially entered just 3 days before the race was set to start, which still blows my mind. 3 days. It takes longer for a teenager to call the shot back with his decision on whether once the window is tilted or not. The answer is always yes. Thomas then hired 24-year-old race car driver Montague Robbins to captain his team. He would be joined by Harold Brinker, a fellow race car driver, and George Schuster, an incredibly talented 35-year-old Thomas Motor Company mechanic who Thomas badly wanted on the team. The only problem is that because Thomas entered a car so late into the process, Schuster was given only a single day's notice to decide whether or not to participate. Considering he had a family, it was kind of a huge ask to commit to being away from home for months on a journey that offered no guarantee of safety. But Schuster agreed, and with that, the teams were set. But right from the start, this race was a complete disaster. And while we would eventually have a winner, and cars would make it to Paris, not everyone would even make it out. On that morning of February 12th, 1908, with 250,000 people there to witness the start of the race firsthand, delays caused major frustration among racers and spectators alike. The cars were set to roll out at 11 a.m. sharp, but Mayor George B. McClellan Jr., who was supposed to fire the starting pistol, had a reputation for being cartoonishly late all the time. So when 11 a.m. came and went with no man in sight, one of the businessmen just grabbed the pistol and shot the damn thing into the air himself, signaling the official start of the race. And just like that, the 6 cars were on their way. The plan was to leave Broadway and 42nd Street and go north towards Albany, and then once free of New York State, it should be a fairly clear shot across the Midwest, venturing south, and then westward towards San Francisco days later. When the Thomas Flyer entered San Francisco, it wasn't the 24-year-old hotshot Montague Roberts at the wheel, but Harold Brinker, with mechanic George Schuster riding shotgun, along with an entirely new teammate. A lot had happened in the preceding month, yet for as miserable an experience as the journey had been up to that point, you could argue the Thomas Flyer had it better than most. Let's rewind. So shortly after the race had started, the cars quickly encountered snow that was over a foot deep in Hudson, New York. So with all the snow, the cars were very slow moving, and it made for an odd spectacle. Men would come out and try to advise the drivers on how to get their cars out of the drifts, while mischievous kids would rain snowballs down on them because little kids are jerks sometimes, no matter which section you were in. Except at least the drivers in 1908 were spared the indignity of having the entire thing posted to TikTok. Despite being bundled up to their noses, it was still bitterly cold, even by the standards of a northeastern February. And these cars didn't exactly have heated seats, or heating, period. To make matters worse, they weren't using antifreeze either, since it wouldn't become commercially available for cars for another 18 years. So the mechanic on each team would have to literally drain the radiator before settling in at the end of the night to prevent them freezing. Yet it wouldn't be the radiator that claimed the first team of the race. Mechanical troubles took out one of France's 3 teams within the first 96 miles of the race, as the Cesare Nobel suffered a broken differential and had to drop out. Even instantly.
These pizzas are built different. Just imagine eating specialty pizzas for $9.99 each.
You're still paying on that one? As you're going on an experience, all your subscriptions and you cancel the ones you don't want, like Sleepy McScreamy over there. Just consider me ruining
first car to get out of New York and break free to Ohio, followed by the Italian Juiced car, and the day young, driven by French aristocrats, the Fred, who had been eager to catch up with the Americans in Ohio before deciding to take it a bit easier in the early going of the race. German Lieutenant Coben, meanwhile, took the opposite approach and paid for it. Pushing his brother's car had resulted in mechanical troubles rearing their miserable head during the New York one, and in the time it took to fix the issues, the gap between the German team and the other competitors widened, which had Lieutenant Coben stressed the hell out since Kaiser Wilhelm II was said to be following the race. France's other remaining car, driven by the notorious Baron Charles Godard, was also getting the short end of the stick. Godard had found his team priced out of logic in a lot of places along the route. This is where you could kind of argue that the race was straight up unfair. You see, towns along the way essentially knew they had all the leverage since the racers relied on hardware stores for fuel and local inns for food and rest, and they didn't have the luxury of trying their luck in the next town if they didn't have the people to get there, or if they were too poorly rested to even try. So these merchants would price gouge these guys, charging them outrageous prices. I'm talking DLC that should have been part of the base game prices. Obviously, this favored the more well-funded teams, yet it arguably hit no one harder than it hit Godard and the motor branch, and nowhere worse than in Indiana, as the French team accepted the hospitality of a farmer who served them a chicken dinner and then charged them $3 for it. Now that might not sound like much, but $3 in 1908 is equivalent to a 2025 value of $105 for 2 chickens. It wasn't even like they laid golden eggs to be able to justify these prices. And of course, Godard was outraged and demanded to know why this farmer was charging them such an inflexible price, at which point the farmer implied it was for emotional distress since the chickens he served them were pet chickens his kids played with. Never mind the fact that nobody forced this man to do this. Meanwhile, the Thomas Flyer was in the lap of luxury by comparison, clearing the first checkpoint in Chicago and being greeted in Omaha, Nebraska with a hot meal and a fresh change of warm clothes that included corduroy pants and raccoon coats, all free of charge. So yeah, I'd be mad too if I were Godard. And so, looking for a way to change their shoddy luck, the Motorblock team sent a dispatch to the Chicago Automobile Club in the hopes that the club would help improve their perception in the community. The dispatch stated, quote, "We are discouraged. The peasants demand $3 per mile for helping us. We charge $5 each to permit us to sleep on the ground. Peasants along the way have filled up loaded Delphi cars so as to help the Thomas car. Would it be possible to influence public opinion? Yes? Then the Chicago Tribune got hold of the note, and it did succeed in getting the press coverage. But yeah, they pretty much bragged on it for their pathetic upheaval, and they made even more unpopular in the eyes of voters. Motorblock was struggling, and Godard was out of ideas on how to catch up with the American Thomas Flyer and the Italian Juiced car. Until he had an idea, with the intention to turn the entire race on its head. The United States had very bad infrastructure. I'm talking just huge swaths of land with no trodden road, much less any paved roads. So cars were constantly getting stuck in mud, running underground, ditches, and having to be pulled out by vehicles. It was really rough going. But Godard noticed that what the United States lacked on paved roads, they made up for with their rail system. So he came up with a plan to lay the Motorblock
dumb dude.
And it was basically a violation of literally the only rule the race even had. It couldn't use trains to make the journey forward. It should have been common sense. It would have been like showing up to the Tour de France on a yacht. Of course, they already knew this, but figured if he was careful enough, no one would counteract him and say, this is the same Charles Goddard, who wasn't really removed from good spots and in the track. So sure enough, as he was loading the motorcraft onto a train, a newspaper photographer caught him in the act. And while he may have been swearing off local chicken, Goddard's goose is definitely cooked. Once the story hit the papers, he received an email from his sponsors. Just 7 short words. Quit race, sell car, and come home. The Motorlock team had just been disqualified. France was down to just 1 representative out of the 3 they had at the start. 3 more teams were left, and cars were on the verge of entering into the most rebellious part of the journey so far, the mountainous western sub-region of the United States. The Italian Zeus car was making good time across Montana until they arrived in an area in Spring Valley. The Zeus driver, ju88, thought he heard a crying child, but as the night air stilled, the sound was replaced by something clearer and closer. The telltale howling of a wolf. Howling while double, triple, quadruple, dozens of wolves. Too many wolves to count. Literally the boss fight from hell, going after a bunch of duplicate enemies with really shoddy hitboxes. Sartori and the journalist poet Antonio Scarfoli, who probably wished by this point that he could just listen to his father and stay on, tried to get the pack to scatter, first by blowing the car, and then by flashing the car's spotlight. But none of this worked, so the 2 men and mechanic Mike Kanda decided they were going to risk it all in one last desperate move, reaching for the trunk to retrieve some guns they had brought for protection. Somehow, the men managed to do this without being torn to shreds, and once they were armed, they just started firing and reloading, firing and reloading, and kept firing until they ran out of bullets, by which point the remaining bullets had run off, and the hungry ones who remaining were no longer paying attention to the Zeus team, because they were busy It sounds utterly unbelievable, like something out of an actual horror movie. Yet the story was corroborated by citizens of the nearby town the next day, who decided to cash in on it by heading to the scene of the battle to collect the pelts from all of those fallen wolves. The Italians continued on their way, hoping to put the whole incident behind them. But not all guns were fired in fear and desperation. Upon arriving in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the Thomas Flyer was greeted by cowboys and cowgirls on horses firing guns into the air in celebration. Children let out of school early in anticipation of the arrival, and building the townsfolk had the chance to see a real live car in person for the first happened in August of 1983 in Germany. She gave him the name of her husband's ex-chauffeur, then named American. Finally, an escape of his new chauffeur left Chicago on the trail of the Thomas. And they found themselves literally held up in fire, not just by the muddy jumbo that had caught the other cars, but by something even stickier. German-American social clubs near every town that insisted on celebrating their toast with pamphlets, fans, and pictures. Yet, believe it or not, the roster changes still weren't done, as the French aristocrat ju88 was butting heads with his Norwegian teammate, the Arctic adventurer Hans Hansen. You see, they clashed on everything from how to proceed through the snowdrifts to just what Sacha Frey even brought to the team, since his crew did the real work of digging the car out whenever they got stuck, while Sacha Frey sat behind the steering wheel, eating and delegating. Hansen had even threatened to toss him out of the car in Chicago if he didn't check his lousy attitude. And this eventually came to a head in the American West, which is fitting because they decided to settle the score with a good old-fashioned duel. But as Hansen and Sacha Frey went to find their pistols to put an end to this once and for all, the aristocrat basically said, "You know what? I don't have to do this. I'm the nephew of the Marquis d'Antillac. I'm the leader of this team, so you're fired." You'd think this would be the end of the line for our Norwegian outdoorsman, Hansen, but he would be wrong. As the Thomas Flyer was down a man after having lost Montague Roberts and his replacement, E. Wayne Matthews, who'd withdrawn after out to Utah. So Hansen jumped ship, defecting to the American team, which made it to San Francisco a little over a month after the race began. The Thomas Flyer was in the lead and on a ship bound for Seattle, with plans to head onward to Alaska to drive across the frozen surface of the Bering Strait. You think you know who gets to Paris first? Well, don't go placing bets just yet. So yeah, driving across the Bering Strait wasn't going to happen, and it's ludicrous that anybody in the Norwegian race committee ever thought it could. Yes, there have been rumors and assumptions that once the Bering Strait is over, you're able to get across on a sled, presumably. And it would be done 100 years after this. So once the Thomas Flyer had arrived in Valdez, Alaska, after their long boat trip, mechanic George Schuster went ahead on a one-horse sleigh to ascertain the condition of the roads, and found that not only would it be impossible to cross the Bering Strait, it would be impossible for the cars to even make it across Alaska. There was just nowhere for these cars to go, so the race committee made the call to abandon Alaska altogether and instead sail to Vladivostok, Russia by way of Japan. Great news for everyone else, bad news for the Americans. Being so much farther ahead meant that they were the only team to go to Alaska, and that boat trip to Seattle and then to Alaska and then Seattle again cost precious time they not only lost their nearly 2-week lead, but fell behind significantly, and the team suffered further frustrations as George Schuster had begun to butt heads with driver Harold Brinker. Historians would note that Schuster was largely the reason the car had made it as far as it had. For instance, over the course of the race, he would repair the new frame by using boilerplate steel to keep everything together. He would drill 2 holes into the flying during another repair, and he would walk alone for miles to find gas or spare parts while his teammates reviewed the car. Yet for that first American leg of the race, Schuster was an unsung hero who got fewer mentions in the papers than his more popular teammates, which now included Hans Hansen and a rider who came named George Miller. Schuster believed he could get the team the rest of the way and campaigned to take the helm, and that's ultimately what he did, and he was taken over at a time when the complexion of the race had changed. Incredibly, the Thomas Flyer was now in last place, but even more astonishing was the German Protos car's comeback, as Lieutenant Koppen was already crossing the Pacific, but not before nearly being disqualified due to a supposed misunderstanding. Basically, the comeback wasn't as miraculous as it seemed on the surface. After the millionth time the Protos had broken down, Lieutenant Koppen decided to leave the car in Utah and hop on a train to Seattle and get parts for it. But once he got the parts, he decided to have the car shipped to him in Seattle by train, unaware of the rules forbidding this. And I presume the reason he may have overlooked this was because he and the car didn't travel together on the same train, so maybe he thought it was okay, or maybe he thought that because the car was inoperable and he was transported, that was all right. Either way, he repaired the car and drove to San Francisco, then hopped on a ship from there. The Parisian Race Committee assessed the situation and decided that this wasn't an intentional attempt to cheat the system like Derek Bedard had tried to do. However, a penalty still needed to be levied against him, so they decided that Koppen would receive a 15-day penalty, meaning even if, through some act of God or comedy, the German team made it to Paris before everyone else, the only way they would be declared the winner is if they managed to do it 15 days before everyone else. Compounding this was the decision by the committee that the Americans would be granted a 15-day advantage in recognition of the lead they lost for having to go through Alaska when nobody else had to. This meant that as long as the Thomas Flyer made it to Paris fewer than 15 days after everyone else, they would be declared the winner. And the benefit doubled to 30 days if the first car to Paris was the German Protos car. So the Parisian Race Committee had just handed the Americans a huge boost, or maybe they just leveled the playing field back to reality. Either way, it was still going to be a tough challenge, as Saint-Tropez and the Daguillon had already crossed Japan, as had the Zoost car. Both were well on their way across Siberia by the time the Americans caught up and faced another delay when they ran into visa issues in Russia. The odds were getting longer for the Americans, but they didn't really catch up. And hey, Siberia couldn't possibly force this slave from South America. Paris race, and the presumption is that because they were national heroes in their respective countries, they could be worth a considerable ransom if taken. Manchurian authorities learned of these potential ransom plots from 3 bandits who were captured along the route, and it drew a clear correlation between the racers' fame and the amount of danger that fame could bring them. Case in point, when the Thomas Flyer arrived in a small village called Manchuria, snow had melted to the building fires of 30 men whose lives had been taken by bandits. It wasn't exactly a place anybody wanted to stop, but the car needed replacement parts, so Schuster left on one of his long trucks by foot to go find some, leaving his team with the Flyer. They were eventually discovered by armed men who approached the Thomas Flyer team, getting in close with their pack of guard dogs, to offer the Americans extra bullets for their pistols and a couple bayonets for protection, along with a stern lecture about how stupid it was to light a campfire in an area where bandits were actively looking for people to rob, which is sound advice, although I would argue the fact that they were in an American touring car would be a bigger neon sign than any campfire. But as the teams trekked further west, the lack of road infrastructure became too big to ignore. The racers had no choice but to use the trans-Siberian Railroad to cross the most treacherous terrain, and the teams received special permission to do this. As transport was arranged, the teams stayed at a hotel to rest, recuperate, and refuel their cars, which proved a bit of a challenge since fuel was really hard to come by in this area. But it was still a welcome break because it allowed for all the cars to catch up, so that for the first time since the war, everyone would start on equal footing. But the Dantillon driver, French aristocrat Sacha Frey, knew his car was in trouble, so he made a proposal so shocking it would turn everyone in the competition against him. Abbott called in her 2012 Smithsonian Magazine article titled Paris or Bust, the Great Vivo Paris Auto Race of 1908, details the plan. Quote, with 1 day to prepare, George Schuster searched for a supply of gasoline, which was scarce in Siberia. Back at his hotel, he received a note summoning him to Sacha Frey's room. When he arrived, he saw that the Italian team was already there. There is no extra, the Frenchman announced. There are no means of getting it. What there was is in my possession. I offered it to the car which will agree to take me on board. The Italians left the room in disgust. Sacha Frey tried to reason with the Americans, stating that he could get a seat on the German car, but the Flyer was sure to beat the Protos into Paris, and he wished to be on the first car to arrive. He added that it would not look well for a Frenchman to ride on the German machine. Schuster calmly said he would think about it, but he was seething. Privately, he told his team that he'd rather stay in Vladivostok for the rest of his life than accept Sacha Frey's bond. Without fanfare, Sacha Frey transferred the rights to his gasoline to the Italian team, but was not allowed to join. His sponsor, the Marquis ju88, decided to finish. Yeah, so the thing about bribes is that you need to have ironclad upper hand. And Sacha Frey had the only fuel in competition, that'd be one thing. But while finding gas was difficult in Siberia, it wasn't impossible. And that would be true on the route ahead. It's not like they would never be able to find it. But the search would potentially add a lot more time to each car's journey. And I think this is the upper hand that Sacha Frey thought he had. But Sacha Frey overplayed his hand like a granny at a Valley Village casino. Except granny is actually playing for something tangible. The journey continued with just 3 cars remaining as June finally arrived and the racers entered their 5th month of competition. After the railway pass, the Italian Zeus good time to arrive at Paris by July 24th. But Clyde, Schuster was slow. He wasn't sleeping. His entire body was sore. He was suffering from dreaded nerves. Yet he felt he had to finish this race himself. He had something to prove. And the next 10,000 miles saw Schuster soldiering on and possessed. Yet, despite his very best efforts, the first car to reach Paris arrived 2 days after Schuster's prediction. And it would not be the Thomas Flyer.
They proceeded to get plans for weight loss, but worried about eye costs and food effects. GoodRx now offers monthly GLP-1 subscriptions. Always know what you'll pay up front. No surprise prices, no hidden fees. And for a limited time, we will keep it for only $1.99 a month for the first 2 bills, plus the cost of your subscription. Get started today.
On July 26th, after 165 days and 22,000 miles, Lieutenant Cody and the German Protos arrived in Paris and crossed the finish line, having claimed victory in the Asia to Europe leg of the journey. But they weren't the official winners yet. The Thomas Flyer had 3 days to get to Paris, and Schuster was hell-bent on doing it. However, it was pretty much over for the Italians, as the Zuzu car had fallen so far behind in Siberia that they were statistically incapable of winning, although they could still finish, and the Italian team refused to give up. Surprisingly, as the Thomas Flyer they were celebrated by the people, despite being the primary rival of their man, Cody. And it seemed that the big reason why was that the motorclub that hosted Schuster and his team were unaware of the penalty against Cody. They thought their man had already won, so Schuster and his team were congratulated for doing their best on the assumption that the Americans were fighting for second place. And after that, what else could Schuster do but hit the gas and blaze a path towards the finish line? Of course, in no way was that final stretch easy. On the one hand, the Thomas Flyer had held up better than any other car, despite all the repairs and injuries. The Flyer had used the same spark plugs for the entire journey. The engine's valves never had to be changed, and the crankshaft bearings were somehow still undamaged, but now the tires were wearing. The clutch had to be removed twice for repair. The brakes were leaking, the motor mount was failing, and a bird had flown into the car and took out the driver's side headlight. But by God, Schuster was going to get his team to Paris. And that's what he did. When the Americans finally arrived in Paris to the roars of spectators, the Thomas Flyer was stopped by a police officer who said, "You're under arrest. You have your lights on your car." A legal oversight had caught the Americans right at the end because in order to drive in Paris, both headlights needed to be on. Some bystanders came out of a nearby cafe to protest the arrest and said that one of those bystanders was a familiar face. ju88 had traveled to Paris after withdrawing from the race in order to meet with race officials and host a champagne reception for the Thomas crew. And he was supposedly one of the bystanders who added their voice to the defense of the Thomas crew. But the police officer didn't care that they were offered to give Americans a better life for his wife. Schuster took out his tools and tried to remove the light from high school and place on the Thomas flyer, but he couldn't get it off. The police officer moved to arrest Schuster, but the king came up with a compromise. Why don't we just put the entire light on the hood of the Thomas flyer? That way the car has two broken headlights. The team mounted the bicycle onto the hood with the light facing out into the street. The police officer looked it over carefully and gave them the okay to proceed. The Thomas flyer arrived at the finish line on July 30th, 1990, just 4 days after the German plunderers, and with 26 days to spend, all while sporting the most ludicrous modification this side of the Empire ride. After 6 months and 20,000 miles, the Thomas flyer had won the greatest race ever won, and were met with cheers from the crowd. Had the Thomas flyer been disqualified, the clerks unquestionably would have, as the Zeus took way longer to get to Paris than just 2 weeks after the German fire. They didn't arrive until September 17th. Yet at no point in the journey did the Italian team ever give up, and they deserve respect for that. From start to the final car crossing the finish line, the race had lasted for over 7 months. The greatest race in the world finally ended. The story wasn't over just yet. While I couldn't find any details of what became of the French representatives like Mary Charles Brown and ju88, perhaps it's just as well that they became immortalized as legends and folk heroes rather than remembered as heroes. Or maybe it's just a disservice to these men by media landscape that, not dissimilarly from 21st century coverage, doesn't stick with the story very long before dumping it for the next big headline. Antonio Scarfolio knew this as well as anybody, being a journalist himself for Il Mattino, a Neapolitan newspaper founded by the father who didn't want him to participate in the race in the first place. Scarfolio would return to journalism and publish a book about the race in 1999 titled Around the World in a Motor Car. Lieutenant Hans Koeppen would become a best-selling author in his own right in Germany upon publishing his book on the race, similarly titled The World by Car. In fact, he became such a popular folk hero in Germany that he was credited with popularizing the toothbrush mustache that would become immortalized worldwide by Charlie Chaplin, who I'm using as an example here to avoid mentioning the other guy who famously wore that mustache. That's right, Groucho Marx. And Koeppen did get those promotions in the army that he was after. 21 years after the race ended, but he would retire as a major general, only a few years before passing away in 1948. Schuster finally received the recognition that he had been rarely afforded in the newspapers during the first leg of the race. Everyone seemed to recognize that Schuster was the reason he won, such that when he actually offered Montgomery Roberts to drive the car for the victory, Roberts declined, telling Schuster that he was not to be Interestingly, the race had drawn attention to the lack of road infrastructure in the United States, and it resulted in campaigns to develop a more comprehensive road network to connect the country. And while the interstate highway system is still decades away, it is clear that public opinions towards cars is changing. This is nowhere more evident than in the increase in sales for the Thomas Company following the Thomas flyer's win. In fact, the Thomas Company was so unprepared for the unexpected growth that they were literally unable to meet demand. And that lack of preparedness ultimately eroded all the benefits the company had earned from the New York to Paris race. Well, that and the arrival of the Model T, which cost 1/10 of what the Thomas flyer cost, and was manufactured by a company capable of meeting production volumes that were commensurate with today. priced out of the market entirely by Ford and other competitors. The Thomas Motor Company shuttered its doors by 1913. In 1907, Thomas Flyer, that had won the race, was nearly lost to history, passing through the hands of private collectors over the next 50 years. But in 1962, casino magnate and avid auto collector Joel Harrah tracked the car down and offered to buy it off of the Long Island Museum on their behalf. Harrah would just need to have it authenticated first, so he brought in then 91-year-old George Schuster to look the car over. Schuster was skeptical that it was the real Thomas Flyer until Harrah had the car disassembled, and there it was. The royal plate still free, the telltale drill holes on the flyer, repairs he had forgotten about in the decades since. Reportedly, tears filled his eyes as he realized that this was the car that had taken the road, the car he had taken away. His neither do without the other. Harrah purchased the car and had it restored to the condition it had been when it arrived in Paris, right down to the missing headlight. And a year later, age 92, George Schuster was invited to drive the restored car, the car that had made him into legend. The Thomas Flyer would be enshrined in the National Automobile Museum in Reno, Nevada. It would be added to the National Historic Vehicle Register earlier this year, in July, actually, 117 years from the month in which the Thomas Flyer first appeared. George Schuster himself would be immortalized as an inductee into the Automotive Hall of Fame in 2010, 38 years after his death in 1972. The following year, in 2011, a race was held in Paris, retracing the route the race was held. Among the competitors was Julie Drives,
Trick. Trick of the clothes.
I can imagine it was fraught with far less peril than the drivers of 1898 counterparts faced. But then, it's hard to imagine there ever being another place like this. There's infrastructure, there are roads, there are gas stations, there's an auto zone in virtually every town. There's also the tension of international relations, making the prospect of a multinational road race somewhat dicey. But beyond all of it, there's no way to capture the same spectacle and wonder that caused hell in 1908. There's no way for a race today to be as influential as New York to Paris in 1908 had been for the popularization of the car. Its adoption by Western society and its enduring status as a necessary component for existing in modern society. But even if the city was, is it possible that the events of 117 years ago stand as a monument to what determination, ingenuity, and simple resilience could accomplish, and how, at one time, being a citizen of the world superseded citizenship in any country. Thank you for watching. If RCR brings any sort of value to your week at all, please consider leaving a like, a comment, sharing the video, or even subscribing, and treating that bell icon like a car trying to scare off a pack of wolves. But if you love RCR stories and want me to make more of these videos,
Spray that thing with water. And that tissue paper dries, it shrinks, it gets like drum tight, there won't be a wrinkle. The key is to get this sprayer like these that are like real atomized, super fine spray. It's a little shitty, but it will work. This thing dries, look at it, it's so tight.
RCR's Patreon has tons of more content. all the stuff that I can't get away with on YouTube anymore. It's fun, it's broad, and it's extra dirt. And for $1, you get all of it. That's it. Less than the cost of a Costco hot dog. $1, you get double the content. You know what else? If anybody can watch this video, join our Patreon, RCR is unstoppable. There's no telling what we can do with your support. So please, go to the Patreon and join it. It's only $1. Thank you so much. And thank you for the other curve. You can feel confident that personal HD thermal cooler legal door will get the job done safely and effectively. Ultra sealing. AC.
It's easy for the screen to steal our time. Less is free. Enough to buy more. Daily protein, less ingredients, less sugar. Savings, less is free.
Hey, welcome to Vice Grip Garage. I'm Barry. And guys, in Phoenix, Arizona, where I just finished up a deal on this 1967 Jeep Wagoneer. It actually blocked David Freiberger. You may remember it from an episode of Local Garage years back. But this isn't the regular Wagoneer. This was actually really neat for a couple reasons. It had the darkness. Buick 350, which it didn't come with, and a 3-speed manual transmission column. But what makes this unique is it's a 67. That wasn't supposed to happen until 68. It's known to have issues factually, and it hasn't run in a few years. Nonetheless, guys gotta try to get this thing fired up, jam it on the road, and try to make it 1,800 miles back home to Tennessee. Should be fine. No, I don't even bring tools. Okay, here we go. So Freiberger is actually here because we just did an epic road trip from LA to Phoenix in a 1929 Model A. Incredible. Which you can actually find on the David Freiberger channel. So run over there and check that out. It was a lot of fun. So I've twisted your arm to feature Wagoneer. Yeah, this is great for some I've ever seen in this truck. What's the scheme on this? It was in Washington. You're trying to figure out why I got here and what happened.
Well, this was in an episode of Roadkill Garage with me and Steve Dulcich, and we had flown up to Washington to get the thing, and for whatever reason we decided that it was not worthy enough to actually take on a trip. We drove it maybe 30 or 40 miles to a junkyard, and the fan is really loose on the water pump, and we were worried that it was going to fail through the radiator at some point, and we were worried we were going to break the bolt. We didn't have production time to fix it, all sorts of TV excuses. Long story short, it ended up apparently on a flatbed with gear, and it's been sitting for 3 or 4 years at this point. Other than that, I don't know if it has brakes. I have no clue about that. It is a 3 on the tree, which is magic because it doesn't have the automatic. It's almost sugar extracted.
Right.
And I think the clutch might be a little weak, but I'm not positive.
Okay.
The Buick 350 was used in full-size Jeeps starting in 1968 in theory, but you can never trust Jeep with that stuff because they had a part spin and they just grabbed whatever was happening for that day. So this is a 67 according to in the title and everything, but it has a Buick 350 in it. And even more frequently, according to my Jeep guru, Rick Payway, it's got that 3 on the tree with
3 on the tree. It's the only one you like.
Well, it's all the way in the
4, 5, 6 speed automatic.
Tootsie Rolls and all that.
Another 3 on the tree. Stop making
Alright, well, it's Halloween. I guess we should talk about that time the United States Marine Corps figured out a way to turn Tootsie Rolls into a weapon. Today we're talking about one of the most underrated, underappreciated battles in United States military history, the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir. When 15,000 U.S. Marines and 3,000 Army soldiers got ambushed and surrounded by 120,000 Chinese Communist forces in the dead of winter, with temperatures reaching as low as -50. But despite the weather, despite being ambushed and taken by surprise, and despite being outnumbered 4-1, the United States Marine Corps led this operation to not only survive, but to kill a disproportionate amount of the enemy and save 10% of the South Korean civilian population in the process. And we're going to get into it right after word from our sponsor. Here's the deal, super simple, straightforward business model. You give them money, they turn around and make sure the data workers on the internet aren't selling your personal information. What does that even mean? Okay, here's the entire internet and every free service on the planet inside of a nutshell. Okay, there's a saying, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. What that means is pretty much anything on the internet that you use, that's a service, whether that be Google, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of it, okay? It's all an app, so one of two things is happening. They're either going to feed you ads, and that's how that company makes money since their service is free, or they're going to collect your personal information and turn around and sell it to data brokers on the internet, and then they're going to turn around and sell it to whoever buys it. Next thing you know, you get 70,000 mobile files every single day. And that's unbelievable. So they will look for and find the ones that are selling personal information and submit opt-out requests on your behalf, and then they obligate you to comply. And then they'll continue to monitor these data brokers, and if they get your information again, then they will submit opt-out requests again. Basically, you're paying them to get rid of all the downsides of all of the free stuff on the internet, which I think is absolutely worth it. If you want to check out all of it, this kind of thing down below, let's get back to the video. Alright, Battle of the Chosin Reservoir. In order to understand it, you have to understand the Korean War. And considering it's literally called the Forgotten War, most people know nothing about it, we're going to go ahead and do a little recap so we're all on the same page. After World War II, the Korean Peninsula is divided along the 38th parallel, pretty much the same order that we have today. Up north, you have the North Koreans that are communists, and they're attacked by the Soviet Union and China. Down south, you have the capitalist South Koreans that are backed by the United States of America and the rest of the Western world. On June 25th, 1950, the North Koreans attack, they invade south with Soviet tanks and Soviet training, and they pretty much steamroll the South Koreans, capturing Seoul, the capital, in less than 72 hours, and driving all of the South Korean forces all the way down the peninsula to a tiny little outpost they're holding out known as Busan Perimeter. And then America steps in. Why does America step in? Because at this point in time, America is practicing what is known as containment doctrine, and containment is referring to communism. Basically, the American leadership has decided that communism is bad and we don't want more of it. However, we don't want to go in there and root out the entire ideology because it would be World War III and it would be a ton of death. So America kind of looks at communism like an inoperable cancer. We're not willing to go in there and take it out of the root. However, we're going to do everything we can to stop it from spreading. The idea being if we can stop it from spreading, we can World War III. Because if we allow the communists to take South Korea or any other nation, then it's going to spread from South Korea to Japan to Australia. It's going to go all over the world. And next thing you know, you've got World War III, capitalism, communism, and it'd be a fucking catastrophe. Whether that's right or wrong, that was the idea and the strategy at the time. Now, the obvious thing to do would be to land all the American forces inside the Busan perimeter and then fight your way back up the peninsula, but that's not what General MacArthur and the rest of the American leadership decided to do. They decided to take a risky strategy of launching an amphibious landing on the other side of the country in Incheon. Why is this risky? Because Incheon is not a very viable location to launch a massive beach. There's literally a seawall there. Every kind of amphibious landing would be possible would be for 1 or 2 hours during the nighttime. And when we're talking about moving tens of thousands of men out of hundreds of boats in a 1 to 2 hour gap at a very particular time, that's going to require both logistical perfection and a significant amount of luck. But that's exactly what happens. On September 15th, 1950, America launches Operation Pearl Mountain, landing 75,000 Marines in Incheon. They immediately take over Incheon, capture the North Koreans off guard, and head straight into Seoul and take it over as well. From here, they pretty much cut the enemy lines in half, cutting off supplies to all of the men south of them, and all of the forces break out of Busan, pushing back up the peninsula. By early October, literally in 2 weeks, America has retaken all of South Korea and pushed it the outrageous success that he's had in his risky operation. He's taken over all of South Korea in like 2 weeks. Everything's going great. He puts the idea in his head of like, hey, what if we break containment doctrine and we push it to North Korea and just eliminate the North Koreans completely, and then we can unify Korea. So he takes this idea to the president and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Joint Chiefs of Staff actually kind of like the idea, but President Truman is pushing it because he doesn't want to start World War III. So he issues the order, U.S. forces are allowed to proceed into North Korea with caution. However, disclaimer, only South Korean forces advance all the way to the border between North Korea and China. And this is a brilliant strategy on President Truman. He's not going to stand. China is a communist nation that's not only backing North Korea, but they're ran by Chairman Mao, just got done fighting the civil wars of the country, fighting against the side that the United States was battling. We know that America fucking hates communism. So Chairman Mao is understandably paranoid that America is going to invade. He also is battle-hardened. He has a lot of men that are also battle-hardened. So Truman, by doing this, is saying, like, hey, we're advancing in North Korea, but we're only going to send South Koreans all the way to the Chinese border. And this is going to send the clear message to China, hey, America's not coming to invade China. We're just going to, stop here 100 miles back, and then we're going to let the South Koreans handle the Korean business. Korea will be unified, and you can stay over there with your communism and not fit. But General MacArthur, in his infinite fucking wisdom and arrogance, decides he's going to defy the orders of the president, aka the commander-in-chief, but not only just the commander-in-chief, the same commander-in-chief that ended World War II. Clearly, that guy doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. So violates orders and orders all of the American forces to advance north all the way to the Yellow River, which is the terrain feature that defines the border between China and North Korea. Now, from Chairman Mao's perspective, this is an enormous fucking issue, understandably so. I mean, imagine if the roles were reversed and China was marching north through Mexico, and he ordered his Chinese communist forces to go all the way up to the Rio Grande. Do you think America and Texas would sit there and twirl their thumbs and hope that the Chinese were going to stop at the Rio Grande, knowing that China had taken a vow to basically eradicate capitalism? Absolutely fucking not. So why would you expect your enemy to not do the exact same thing that you would do in that situation? Sorry, if you're getting the vibe and I'm like General MacArthur, it's because I don't. Oh, General MacArthur said he returned to the Philippines in World War II, and that's exactly what he did. Oh, did he? Did he fly in like Superman, take laser beams out of his eyes and tank the entire island by himself? Or was it the 1 million Marines and Army guys that went in there and gave their lives to liberate the Philippines? And why did he have to take a vow to return to the Philippines anyways? Was it because after Pearl Harbor had been attacked and he received early warning that the Japanese were coming, he decided to not give all of his planes under the air, so when the Japanese showed up, they had to bomb all the planes still on the fucking ground, getting a bunch of men killed? And then he tried to delay the battle strategy of having all of his fell back in the pond, and instead he tried to defend the entire island of course, getting even more men killed because losing the Philippines would make him look bad. And then when pretty much all hope was lost, he decided to hop in a PT boat in the middle of night and evacuate himself and abandon his men. Is that why he had to return? Look, that's not fair because he was ordered by the president to evacuate the Philippines. Look, just like he was given the order by the president to not have U.S. troops approach the Chinese border, but ordered his troops to go right there anyways. It's almost like he's willing to follow orders whenever it saves his own ass, and he's willing to defy them and put all his men in harm's way the second he thinks it's going to pad his own fucking glory. I'm sorry, I'm getting very sidetracked. I apologize. issues the order to go all the way to the Yali River, aka the Chinese border. Marines go into North Korea, start kicking ass, start beating their way all the way up the peninsula. They're advancing so fast that the front lines are moving faster than the supply lines can keep up. They're literally outrunning the supply lines. While that's going on, Chairman Mao in China sees that America is invading North Korea, so they do understandable thing and start amassing hundreds of thousands of troops on the Chinese border in case America decides to attack. American intelligence knows about this. They give the reports to General MacArthur. General MacArthur ignores them. The Marines keep advancing north, outrunning supply lines. At this point, Chairman Mao starts sending his Chinese forces into North Korea under the cover of night on foot. By November 1st, 1950, Chinese troops are confirmed in combat with the United States Marine Corps. It's Truman's desk. It's MacArthur's desk. MacArthur says that's not possible. Keep advancing towards the Chinese border. November 2nd, 1950, Marines advance into the Sudong Gorge on their way to the Chosin Reservoir when they are ambushed by a sizable Chinese element. Unfortunately for them, the Marines that they ambushed was the 1st Marine Division, being led by none other than Chesty motherfucking Fuller, the greatest Marine of all time. The 1st Marine Division suffers 30 casualties, and the Chinese suffer upwards of 300. So that's good. The battle went about as well as it could have for war, but also pretty big fucking red flag that there's actual Chinese elements now in North Korea engaging the Marines, which MacArthur, you'll never guess, decides to ignore. And for the first couple of weeks of November, there's skirmishes all over the place between Chinese forces and the U.S. Marines. But MacArthur and his guys make the call, just keep pushing. So the lead element of the 1st Marines winds up in a place called Hydroloo, just south of the Chosin Reservoir, which is a massive man-made lake. From here, the plan is we're going to have to split and send guys on both sides to keep advancing north. The man in charge of this section of the Marines is General Oliver Smith, and he is not happy about this idea at all. Here's the thing. The terrain in this area of North Korea is described as being straight up or straight down. Either you're going up a hill or you're going down a hill. And the roads that you see on the map are literally bad, going downhill, road, cliff. There's nowhere to go. There's one way in and one way out, both directions. And Congo Road is kind of a stretch. It's literally a poor ox trail that they can barely fit a truck on. And going back the other direction isn't any better. Going back towards friendly lines, there's still one trail going to the nearest town of Kodori, and that's 12 miles away. And then from Kodori, again, there's one trail, one road that goes 35 miles back to the port where all the supplies have to come in. So at Haveru, they're like 50 miles deep with one way in and one way out. And if anything goes wrong, they're fucked, and they want to keep advancing further in, splitting their forces under the same conditions. But thankfully, General Smith realizes this is a humongous mistake and starts stockpiling supplies at Haveru and orders his engineers to start building an airstrip so they can fly shit in and out. Seeing this, General MacArthur and his staff are like, ready to go General Smith, preparing for the worst, hoping for the best. What a brilliant point. No, I'm just kidding. MacArthur and his staff are mad at General Smith and make fun of him for being overly cautious and slowing down the operation instead of just driving headfirst further into enemy territory with no backup plan. But General Smith, being a good leader, says, I don't really care about my own personal glory of being the first guy to reach the Yali River. I would much rather do it the safe way and look out for my guys. So that's exactly what he does. He stocks up supplies in Haveru and builds an airstrip. Hey, never mind, it's November in North Korea. It's dipping down into like negative 30, negative 9, and it snows there. We're one snowstorm away from blocking this ox trail, cutting off supply lines, and everybody freezes and starves to death. So even without the threat of the Chinese military, this was a good and necessary idea. So they set up the 1st Marine Division headquarters right there with 3,600 men and the airstrip. From here, they sent the rest of the Marines and the Army guys up around the Chosin Reservoir. Up the right side, they sent 2,500 U.S. Army guys backed up by about 1,000 South Koreans. While they're advancing north, they come across a place called Pudong, and after that, the weather is so bad they have to leave their armored unit, their tanks, there in Pudong, while the rest of the men advance forward. And they end up taking a position right here, and they dig in. Going up the left side of the reservoir, they have Fox Company, 234 Marines, that go up on a bridge securing the choke point on the road right here, and then the rest of the 8,000 Marines advance into a place called Pudong Lee, where they dig in. November 23rd rolls around. Thanksgiving, they all get cold turkey while they're freezing their ass off in negative 20+ degree temperatures. November 24th, MacArthur comes to the division headquarters celebrating, telling everybody we're all going to be home by Christmas, hooray, and then he takes off and fucks off in his butt. What MacArthur doesn't know is that now has already sent in 120,000 soldiers to surround everybody in the Chosin Reservoir. And the Marines don't know that either, so they're all just hanging out, freezing their asses off. It's so cold that the lubrication that they use on their guns actually turns into jelly and would jam the guns. So they strip all their guns of all the lubrication, and if they get in a firefight, they're just going to have to run the guns dry. But that's not going to happen because MacArthur was just here. He said we're going to be home by Christmas. The war is basically won. Hooray! I just got to sit around and freeze my ass off for 5 days, and so I have to go. November 27th, 10 o'clock at night, both at ju88, the Army position, and Fox Company, all the Marines are hanging out, they're in their sleeping bags, they're sleeping, they're waiting for the war to get over, and then they hear bugle calls off in the distance, and within minutes, all hell breaks loose as wave after wave of Chinese soldiers start rushing their position. The Marines that were up monitoring the perimeter are scrambling to get guns up and running because the bolts have frozen in place because it's so fucking cold. They're literally pissing on the machine guns to break the bolts loose. The Marines that were sleeping are scrambling to get out of their sleeping bags and get their guns as a firefight breaks out. The Marines that are just waking up don't even have time to get all their cold weather gear on. Some of these guys are literally running around in a firefight in negative 50-degree weather with no boots, just wearing their socks. The Marines start mowing down the Chinese soldiers as they attempt to attack their position, but the Chinese just keep coming wave after wave after wave. And after the first couple of waves, the waves that are coming out now, some of them don't even have on them. They're just running into the battlefield, picking up a gun out of dead Chinese soldiers, and then attacking the Marine position. The Marines got everything going for them. They have machine guns, they have the high ground. Granted, it's negative 50 degrees, but that affects everybody, the enemy included. But the Chinese are throwing so many men at the Marines, they can't keep up. Even with the machine guns running full clip, they're still managing to get to the Marine position. And other Marines are fighting off the Chinese in hand-to-hand combat with rifles and bayonets, trying to keep them off the machine gunners. It's literally the nastiest, grittiest warfare you could imagine. It is like knife inside of the freezer. The foxholes are shallow because the ground is so frozen, so the Marines literally start taking the dead bodies of Chinese soldiers and stacking them into walls. It goes all night long. The Marines at ju88, the Army on the other side of the reservoir, and Fox Company all fight their asses off all night. And you gotta remember, Fox Company is only 234 guys holding a position by themselves with no backup for miles, and they are being attacked by thousands of Chinese soldiers. And if they can't hold the choke point of this road, 8,000 Marines up north of ju88 are completely cut off and we're absolutely gonna die. Luckily, the man in charge of Fox Company is Captain William Barton, a veteran of Saipan and Tarawa, two of the biggest, nastiest battles in World War II. He radios into HQ as they're being attacked. We're surrounded, don't need to hold. The 234 Marines of Fox Company spend their night farming the commies for XP. Captain Barton gets shot through the leg, refuses to get medevac, and walks around the battlefield on a crutch, commanding his men all night long. Morning breaks, the battle's over. Fox Company has escaped 24 casualties. Bear in mind, casualties is dead and wounded, whether that be from battle or cold weather. On the flip side of the coin, Fox Company literally quits counting the dead bodies outside the perimeter at 1,500. That's not including all of the ones that were wounded by the battle and the weather. Across the entire chosen reservoir, the Marines up at ju88, Fox Company, and the Army, it's suspected that America lost between 600 and 700 soldiers, with hundreds of more wounded by either the battle or cold weather. Estimates of the Chinese casualties are in excess of 12,000. The battle reports get sent down to General Smith. Smith is freaking out. He kicks him up to higher command, and higher command doesn't believe him. So MacArthur sends out his right-hand guy, his patsy, his yes man, General Almond. Mr. Peanut shows up at the Army position in his helicopter. He hops out, and the Army commander informs him, I've got like 400 dead soldiers. A bunch of guys are wounded. We captured a bunch of Chinese guys last night. We've recognized catches from two separate divisions. These two divisions of Chinese soldiers, 26,000 guys surrounding this position right now. To which General Almond, not believing him, says, there's not two divisions in all of North Korea. Quote, are you gonna let a bunch of laundrymen in the vestibule? End quote. He then gets in his helicopter and pops off. The governor hits down then issues orders to the First Marine Division to continue their advance towards the Yalu River. At this point, General Smith and Mayman realize that they are now basically completely on their own. Entire command has lost their fucking minds. General Smith goes that if Fox Company falls, all the Marines at ju88 are done for. And if he falls at the crossroads at the base of the Chosen Reservoir, the entire division is done for. The real problem is, his HQ at the base of the Chosen Reservoir, right at the crossroads, has 3,600 Marines, but they're not infantry. These are combat troops, cooks, and mechanics, and engineers and shit. These are not hardened combat Allied troops. But they're about to be because he orders absolutely everybody to get their guns and get ready for a fight and pick up defensive positions because the Chinese are coming for them next, and he knows it. And sure enough, the Chinese start launching attacks through the day on November 28th. They launch attacks everywhere they had attacked the night before, and they're now attacking the division HQ at Hageru, where General Smith is. The Chinese penetrated so far south that they actually came out completely surrounded as well. General Smith knows it now wants to divide and conquer the camp level for this, so he sends the order after his men in the field, hold your position as long as you can, and then make your way back to Hageru so you can consolidate forces. And that's exactly what they do. They fight all day and all night on the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, and then when they can't take anymore, they finally start to make their way back to Hageru. And this isn't just hopping the trucks and driving 10 miles down the road. They're completely surrounded. But they are moving, they are fighting every single inch of the way while trying to get hundreds of wounded men out the entire time. The army fights their way down to Hudong where they reconvene with their tanks and continue fighting their way down to Hageru. The Marines have to fight their way down to where Fox Company is, reconvene with them, and continue fighting their way down to Hageru. And while that's going on November 29th, Hageru is completely surrounded, the road is cut off, they have no way of escaping. So they call on what remains of the 1st Marines down south, and they only colonel in charge of that, Chesky Kohler, who drives north and takes over the nearest town 11 miles from Hageru called Kohler. The Chinese try to stop Chesky Kohler with the 1st Marines, but they can't stop him. Once he's taken the town, they launch multiple attacks trying to take it from the camp. From there, they immediately put together Task Force Drysdale, 900 infantry troops, and convoy 11 miles up to Hageru to reinforce them. Task Force Drysdale has to fight through the entire way. 1/3 of the men in that convoy end up being killed or wounded. Another third are forced to turn back because there's so many damaged trucks blocking the road. And only 1/3 makes it into Hageru. But now Hageru has 300 infantry soldiers helping all the cooks in the camps. As the Marines from UAV and the Army unit continue to fight their way south, the only Hageru in this fight is the airfield, bringing its 47s full of supplies and carrying out thousands of wounded. You know, that same airfield the General Smith got a bunch of shit for building because it was unnecessary. He was being overly cautious. Yeah, well, now it's the only one they have. The Army fights their way down. They make it to Hageru on December 1st. That same exact day, they've got C-47s coming in, dropping supplies, carrying out wounded. And somewhere along the lines, obviously, they're running low on ammo, they're running low on medical supplies, they're running low on food. It's a complete disaster. One of the things that they did was 60mm mortar rounds, commonly referred to as Tootsie Rolls. Well, apparently the guy loading the C-47 didn't know that, so an entire C-47 full of literal Tootsie Rolls, like the candy, shows up. Literally just cases and cases and pallets of fucking Tootsie Rolls. And the Marines are like, I guess we're eating candy and kicking ass? Why not? Bear in mind, they're still getting attacked all day and all night, just repelling wave after wave, meat wall after meat wall of commies. And pretty soon it's just dead commies and Tootsie Roll wrappers all over the fucking place. And then the Marines start to realize that in sub-zero temperatures, Tootsie Rolls are more than just a delicious treat. And you stick it in your mouth and chew it up a little bit and take it out. It makes basically rubber cement, and you start using it to patch fuel lines and patch holes and fix all kinds of shit in Hageru. And the Marines and the Army just keep fighting all day, all night, doing everything they can for their wounded. Cold absolutely sucks. It's freezing the morphine, people are in pain. But on the flip side, the cold is also freezing shut wounds that would normally cause a lot of men to bleed to death. So the cold actually ended up saving a lot of lives as well. Everybody's got frostbite to varying degrees, but everybody just keeps fighting their ass off. And by December 2nd, the rest of the Marines from ju88 make their way into Hageru. And while all this is going on, somewhere along the line, it finally dawns on higher command that they have severely fucked up. MacArthur is just a complete thing. The newspapers back home have completely written off the Eastern Division. The newspaper headlines basically saying they're doomed, they're a lost division, they're all gonna die. Pray for your loved ones. And as the Marines from ju88 are coming in, even though they haven't read those headlines and they haven't heard that, they feel that way. Their heads are hanging low, they're beat up, they're frostbitten, they've got wounded, and it just fucking sucks. And as they come marching in, all the other Marines in Hageru and the Army start chanting the Marine Corps hymn. And as the Marines hear that, they lift their heads a little bit higher, and they go from staggering into Hageru to marching into Hageru. And this is it. This is a Hollywood moment. This is Eye of the Tiger playing in a Rocky movie where everybody decides this fight isn't fucking over yet.
Baseball team for him. And from
guys that left the campaign and the Army unit, they're bringing everybody in, they're getting them fed, they're trying to get everybody warm. You get C-47s flying in supplies, carrying out wounded, bringing in ammunition, food, rations, absolutely everything. The Marines literally using flamethrowers to heat up the food because it's frozen solid. The Chinese are still trying to attack, but America's got more superiority, artillery, supplies, they've got everything going for them except for numbers. The question is now, how are we going to get everybody out of here? We can fly everybody out of C-47s, but then we're going to have to abandon all the trucks, all the artillery, all the equipment, and then we're going to have a bigger issue of once the Chinese figure out that we're flying out all of our guys, the guys that they leave out at the ass end, if they get attacked, they're all going to die, so that's not really an option. The only option is to fight 11 miles south back to Coto Reed and Chesky and the rest of the 1st Marine Division, and then from there they're going to have to link up and fight further south from Coto Reed going to California, where they're going to get on a ship and get out of there. So they spend the next 4 days getting ready for this massive movement, trying to fly out the most wounded in airplanes, but they're not going to be able to get all the wounded out of the plane. They're going to have to put them in trucks and take them with them. Now, this type of movement is what the historians and battlefield experts would refer to as a fighting retreat. Basically, you're going to have to fight when you're defending your wounded and extract the other way. The problem is, and what General Smith would later argue, this is not a fighting retreat because I'm completely surrounded. I'm not falling back from the enemy lines. I'm literally assaulting another direction, and that's exactly what he tells us then, and it sets the vibe for the entire operation. We're not falling back. We're going back in and through the enemy. That's exactly what they do. The Marines punch through and fight 11 miles straight to Coto Reed, where they link back up with Chesky and the rest of the 1st Marine Division. While in Coto Reed, they're still obviously having supplies and everything they're dropped in, whether it was purely a mistake or whether somebody in the Air Force has a really good sense of humor. Some of the supplies that the air dropped in were crates and crates of condoms. Which whether it was intentional or not, they might have best be good comic relief because let's face it, the Marines are only good at 3 things: getting stuff dead, broken, or pregnant, and pretty much all the enemies dying off, everything's already broken, being patched together with fucking Tootsie Balls. There's only one thing left they can do. All jokes aside, there's still work to be done, and somebody's got to get the Marines back on task, and this is where Chesky comes up with one of the most famous quotes in Marine Corps history. Quote, "We're surrounded." That simplifies the problem. They're to the left of us, they're to the right of us, they're in front of us, they're behind us. They can't get away this time. And with that, around 14,000 Marines and 1,000 vehicles set off on this 35-mile journey. Now, remember, this is a narrow road, only 1 car wide. This convoy stretches for miles. As the lead element approaches Chilling Pass, there is a bridge. It is the only way to get across this massive gorge. And when they get there, the bridge is blown up right in the middle with a 29-foot gap. The Chinese have them trapped. There is no other way out. This is it. This is game over for anybody except for them. Because America has completely built the ones that see to the Marines get on the radio and say, "We need a bridge." Air Force simply replies, "How?" The Marines will leave the trucks on the road, fight on the bridge, take the high ground, and start engaging the enemy for hours, giving the Air Force time. While that's going on, the Air Force acquires 8 portable bridge sections weighing 3,000 pounds apiece that have never been dropped out of a plane before. Do practice runs figuring out how to drop these things out of a plane without breaking them and without getting people killed, figures it out and airdrops the bridge pieces back at Coto Reed, where the Marines load them onto trucks and bulldozers and give them in the convoy headed to the bridge. And this gets done in the span of less than 24 hours. Once the bridge making there with the Marines still engaging the enemy and the workers under fire, they then install the bridge sections and then go from "there's no bridge or fuck" to "hey guys, we've got a bridge," only 36 hours. Oh, and I forgot to mention, this was during the worst weather of the entire affair, with temperatures dipping down to -55 degrees during a blizzard where visibility was less than 50 feet in front of your face. And that's it. Once they cross this bridge, they're home free. There's a couple of more skirmishes between here and Hootenann, but they just wipe them to the side. You gotta remember, the Chinese have been out there just as long as them, and they're not getting all this resupply and everything else. These guys are hooting. They're rolling up on setup ambushes and checkpoints, and the Chinese soldiers are literally just frozen solid in place. And as they're making this multi-day operation to Hootenann, this last 35 miles, the weather breaks, and it goes from being -55 degrees to like 30 degrees. An 80-degree temperature shift, and for these guys, it's fucking hot out. So when the 14,000 Marines roll into Hootenann, the same Marines and newspapers have been saying they're as good as dead, they're doomed, they're a lost cause for weeks. Roll in, they do it sitting on top of tanks and in trucks like half dressed. So they look up at the UN forces in Homeland. There's now 100,000 men there, but there's still hundreds of thousands of Chinese that are coming down as reinforcements to crush them. They gotta get out of there as soon as possible. They've got 100 ships to load everybody up on, but then things get complicated because 100,000 Korean civilians start showing up from all the towns and villages nearby because the Chinese were looting them and killing them, or they just don't want to live under the threat of communism their entire lives, and they just start walking to Hunan and beg them to help. We've only got 100 ships to get 100,000 of our own guys out of there. I don't think many people would judge them if they said, "I'm sorry, we can't help you. We're trying to do everything we can. We got to save ourselves first," but that's not what they did. U.S. forces have lost a ton of men. They've got thousands of wounded. They've got over 10,000 men suffering from this fight. And they said, fuck it, we can still impromptu successfully pull off one of the largest humanitarian evacuations in the history of the world. Why not? They ripped the entire city to blow up, including the port, and then loaded absolutely everybody, the UN troops and 100,000 civilians on these ships, and it is just ass-packed like sardines. To give you an idea of how packed it was, the USS Meredith, a merchant marine vessel that only had 68 crew members, managed to cram over 14,000 Korean civilians on board. And on an extremely dangerous 7-day voyage to safety, not a single one of them would die. In fact, 5 people were born, giving it the nickname the Ship of Millions. So they got absolutely everybody evacuated onto ships, got underway on this extremely dangerous 7-day voyage, and then blew up the entire city. Over 1 million people in South Korea today are descendants of those civilians that the UN troops saved. At the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir, 1,079 American troops died in combat. Another 4,582 were wounded, with thousands more suffering from frostbite. Conservative estimates from the UN believe the Chinese military suffered somewhere around 43,000 casualties, with other credible estimates ranging as high as in excess of 60,000. The Chosin Reservoir would go on to become one of the most decorated battles in American history, with the men earning 17 medals of honor, including Captain Barber of Foxton, 73 Navy crosses, one of which went to Chesapeake Color, and 23 Distinguished Service Crosses. Many of the Marines that survived the Chosin Reservoir would later in life go on to express great pride in the fact that they not only managed to save themselves, but they managed to save South Korea as well. And allegedly, many of them were requested to be buried in Chosin Reservoir. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is the rest of the nation. Without all ju88. Bye for now.
Just kind of like a primer. Let it dry, now use like good paint. How many pairs of pants do you think I'm wearing? 2, 3, 4?
Comments all kinds of things. At some level, that's together. Others, real different. Find exactly what you're looking for. Booking.com, booking.yeah. Customers spend $5 and get $250 in bonus rates if you win. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about Alvin York, one of America's most well-known and renowned war heroes. He earned the Medal of World War I. He captured 130 German POWs. While in World War II, a Marine set up break his record. And he didn't just break it, he broke it by nearly a factor of 10, yet almost nobody knows his name. That's about to change. Today we're talking about Guy Gabaldon, aka the Pied Piper of Saipan, credited with 33 confirmed kills and capturing over 1,500 POWs. In medieval folklore, the Pied Piper is a man that comes to town with a magic flute. The town is infested with rats, and he says, "Pay me, I'll get rid of all the rats." The townspeople agree. He then uses his magical flute to entrance all of the rats and guide them out of town. Upon returning back to the town for his payment, they refuse to pay him. So he then uses his magical flute to lure away 130 children, and they're never seen again. As far as I can tell, it's some kind of cautionary tale, essentially saying pay your bills or somebody's going to kidnap your kids, but whatever, it's not important because we're talking about the Pied Piper of Saipan, which is much different. Guy is not a mythical man with a magical flute. He is a 5'3" Marine of Hispanic descent that grew up with a Japanese family in East LA. He understands the Japanese culture, he understands their mindset, and most importantly, he can speak their language. With this deeper understanding of the Japanese than the average American, he goes behind enemy lines by himself and convinces them to surrender, saving both them and the Marines that they would inevitably kill in combat. It was one of the greatest and most dangerous humanitarian efforts ever undertaken by a single man. And we're going to get into all of it right after we're from our sponsor. I hope we what show and the story of Fraser, what do you have for me?
Well, my grandfather fought in World War II, and he just recently passed. And I found something odd in the sock drawer.
Hey, you found little boy in a sock drawer?
You know what I found.
Well, that's a little boy.
So, can you tell me what it's worth?
Yeah. You have price check on the entire city of Tokyo. I used to just think of some of those straightforward business models. You put that money in the account, and you sell your personal information. What does that even mean? Okay, here's the entire internet and every service of the planet inside of the next shell. Okay, there's a saying, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. What does this mean? Everything on the internet that you use, that's a service, whether that be Google, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of it. Okay, it's all an app. So one of two things is happening. They're either going to feed ads, and that's how that company makes money since their service is free, or they're going to collect your personal information and kill them and sell it to data brokers on the internet, and then they'll get it from there and sell it to government. So they're just thinking of 17,000 or 1,000 every single day. And that's where the legal comes in. They will look to do all the shit to data brokers and find the ones that are selling your personal information and submit back out to us on your behalf, and they're the obligation to do that. And then they'll continue to monitor these data brokers, and when they get your information again, the legal will submit back out to the license again. Basically, you're paying the legal to get rid of all the downsides of all the free stuff on the internet, which I think is absolutely worth it. If you want to check out all the discount code down below, let's get back to the video. Alright, our story begins on March 22nd, 1826. Guy Gabaldon is born. He was one of 7 kids, and he grew up during the Great Depression. The Great Depression starts in 1929, goes from 1979. Pretty much his entire childhood takes place during the Great Depression in East LA. Like pretty much every other World War II hero we talk about, he grew up dirt poor, made him tough as nails. We're not going to waste much time on it. What's unique about Guy is that he actually grew up going out and shining shoes at the age of like 7 through 10 on Skid Row. And just so all Skid Row in the 1930s is much different than Skid Row now, okay? It wasn't full of a bunch of people that were suffering from drug problems and like rampant drug abuse. It was a bunch of people that had just genuinely lost everything in the Great Depression. These people living in tents were like former investment bankers, former businessmen that just truly lost everything and now they were homeless. So it's still a wild place for a 10-year-old to be hanging out, but it wasn't like excessively dangerous like it is today. And over time, he kind of became like the mascot of Skid Row. Like all the homeless people knew who he was, they were all friendly to him. The cops knew who he was, the cops were looking out for him. The local businesses all knew he was going door to door on local businesses, trying to shoes. Half the time he was literally sleeping in a bar near Skid Row because they knew him to eat shine shoes all night long. As time went on, he got involved in a gang called the Mo Gang. He started getting more and more into a life of crime, and his family stepped in and they sent him to live in New Mexico. His grandfather helped straighten him out. And his grandfather was like nothing he'd ever seen. He grew up in LA hanging out on Skid Row. His grandfather was born in the mid-1800s and had done a real cowboy shit, lived in New Mexico his entire life, carried a revolver on his hip and kept a loaded shotgun by the front door. And Grandpa is kind of offended that his grandson doesn't speak Spanish and has no idea about the heritage that he comes from. So Grandpa teaches him both how to speak Spanish and tells him all about his heritage. He's a descendant of the conquistadors. And as time goes on, that's exactly what happened. Guy starts taking account of his heritage, and he doesn't want to go hang out on a skid row and be involved in crime anymore. He wants to be an upstanding citizen and accomplish great things. He ends up coming back home to East LA when he's about 12 years old, and he decides that's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to put his best foot forward. He's going to school. He's trying. He's putting in an effort. And that's when he kind of takes notice to other people around him. And there's this Japanese thing. And the Japanese people that use that just seem to excel at absolutely everything. The kids do great in the school. The parents were first generation immigrants that came to America with nothing, and now they're all business owners and upstanding members of the community. And Guy decides that's who he's going to start associating with more. He ends up becoming really close friends with the Mikado family, and ultimately ends up moving in with them for a number of years, not because he has like issues with his mother and his siblings, but it's the Great Depression. They've got 7 kids, it's a lot of mouths to feed, there's not a lot of money going around, and this wealthy Japanese family was willing to take him in, feed him, give him everything he needed to succeed and excel at school, and that's just what ended up happening. During his time with the Mikado family, Guy wanted to know absolutely everything about the Japanese culture. He was obsessed with the samurai, the Bushido code of honor. He learned about Japanese history. He ended up learning how to speak Japanese, not in the formal, I'm going to sit down in a classroom setting. This word means that word means this word. No, he was just immersed in Japanese speaking, so he could speak it fluently like a normal Japanese person. And this goes on for years. It's great. It's the kind of guy's life. And then, when he's 15 years old, Pearl Harbor happens. Shortly after that, FDR issues Executive Order 9066, essentially stripping all Japanese Americans of all of their rights, and then his family, the Mikado family, is forced to leave behind their businesses, their homes, everything they have, and go into a concentration camp. And Guy absolutely hates this. He ruins his entire life. He's resentful of all the Americans around him that are too stupid to understand that the Mikado family, all the other great Japanese Americans, aren't Japanese, they're American, just like everybody else. And he absolutely hates the Imperial Japanese for attacking and creating this entire situation. On top of that, his older brother was in the United States. Thankfully, he survived, but the Japanese tried to kill his brother too, just adding further insult and anger to that. When he's 15, there's absolutely nothing to do about it. He's not going to be allowed to join the military for another 2 years, so he just buys his gun. He ends up getting in a little bit of trouble. He gets a motorcycle, which is like the only joy he has is riding his motorcycle around town. And he just waits for 2 years to pass so he can go off to war and take his aggression against the Japanese. And during those 2 years, Guy's paying attention to the news. In the first couple of years for the Pacific War, America going to war against the Japanese, it was not going good for them. Really, the only silver lining that America had was the submarine fleet. The submarines were going out and taking the fight to the Japanese, and they were winning. With incredible stories like nothing much more than the USS Water. Seeing this, it became what Guy wanted to do. He wanted to go serve the Navy on a submarine and take the fight to the Japanese, begin his revenge for ruining his life. So on his 17th birthday, he goes straight to the Navy recruiter. First off, he's too short. We got to be 5'4". He's 5'3" and 3/4. He's like trying to serve on a submarine. And how tall I am shouldn't matter. Honestly, the smaller the better. I'm saving room for other people. And they're like, fucking pop up on your ticket, this guy. Okay, so he gets up. Okay, you're 5'4". Great, wonderful. He goes to the medical exam. Oh my God, you have a perforated eardrum. You're not going to be allowed to serve in the U.S. And the doctor thinks he's giving Guy a solid. He thinks he's giving Guy good news. And he's like, relax, son. You're not going to have to go off the door. We can't take you with this perforated eardrum. But that's not the case. Guy wants to go to war. He's immediately pissed off. So he starts arguing with the doctor and the recruiter. And they're like, look, son, you've already overlooked your height. We can't overlook this perforated eardrum because when the guns go off, it can be a big problem. And he's like, I'm trying to serve on a submarine. What guns are going off inside of the submarine? Okay, if I hear a loud noise, I'm probably seconds away from dying anyways, and it's not going to matter. Just let me go be on the sub so I can fight the Japanese. And they're like, sorry, can't do it. Fuck off. The guy, he's not going to the answer, so he walks right out the Navy recruiter, walks right next door to the Marine recruiter, goes in and says, let me in, coach. Literally whatever you got. All I know is that the Navy and the Marines and the Navy guys fight the Japanese right now. I want to fight the Japanese. Recruiter takes one look at him and is like, you're not tall enough. Kick rocks. At which point, Guy, as an Navy, even though he's a Navy, he's still a Navy I'll get you in. At this point, guys like, sweet, no problem, goes over to the Marine linguist. Marine linguist like, yep, he speaks Japanese. He goes back to the recruiter, gets the paperwork signed, he's been shipped out to basic, then he's going to linguist school, and he's going to be an interpreter. So, guy ships out to basic at 5'3", 126 pounds, and he's Hispanic. And at this point in time, the United States Marine Corps was 100% white by regulation and policy until 1941. So he's literally one of the first not ever, and he's a really small guy. So he gets made fun of, and he gets a lot of shit. Some of it's for his size, a lot of it's for his race. It's really not that great of a cut. He barely makes it through basic training, but he does. He graduates, he officially becomes a United States Marine. After graduating boot camp, he's given 30 days of leave before he has to go to school. So he goes back home with his fancy dress uniform, and boy oh boy, is he a celebrity amongst the ladies. In his own words, and I quote, the gals were very patriotic and were willing to show their love of their country by giving all for their servicemen. And I believe it was my solemn duty to help these girls show their well, homie's definitely a lady. So 30 days of leave comes and goes. He reports to linguist school. He's there for about a month, and then he earns a weekend pass. And he is explicitly ordered not to return home. He can just go out in like the surrounding area and not get in a bunch of trouble. So naturally, Guy goes back home because he wants to help ladies, show their patriotism some more. While back home in East LA, he's hanging out with a bunch of hot Russian chicks. They're slanging vodka. He ends up getting into an altercation with a large Russian man who punches him and ends up breaking his jaw in 2 places. Ends up getting his jaw wired shut like he's 50 Cent. Shows back up to linguist school with his jaw wired shut, as I'm sure you can imagine. In linguist school, having a jaw wired shut is kind of a big deal, and he violated orders. So he gets kicked out of linguist school, sent back home until he's fully recovered, and then he's supposed to report back, and the Marine Corps is going to give him a new MOS. Doctor says it's going to take about 2 months to recover from this broken jaw, and the Marine doctor then looks him dead in the eyes and is like, Marine, do not go home and get drunk. Do not drink a bunch of alcohol. If you puke with your jaw wired shut, you will drown on your own puke. Do not drink alcohol. So he goes, spends the next 2 months having fun, drinking booze. Supposed to report back to duty. He's now at the whim of the United States Marine Corps. Just whatever they need, that's what they're going to assign him. It's World War II. He obviously gets stationed as infantry. So he goes off to infantry school. You learn the basics, and then after you learn the basics, you get assigned to like a special type of weapon. You can be a rifleman, you can be a machine gunner, you can be a mortarman, and he gets put as a mortar. And of course, he's the new guy, and he's here because he got in trouble. So he's going to be the guy carrying the base plate, which is this gigantic 35, 45-pound hunk of metal that he has to carry into battle with him to set the mortar on top of. Which is, in my opinion, the shittiest job. Like, I was a medic, so I had to carry a gun, ammo, all my own personal stuff, and the big heavy aid bag. The only dude I ever looked at in the military out of any other job and been like, at least I'm not that guy, was the private carrying the mortar plate for the mortar crew. Because that shit looked like it absolutely sucked. And bear in mind, Guy is 5'3", 126 pounds. But you know what? He doesn't complain. He's a Marine. He's going to get the job done. He wants to go off and fight the Japanese. So he graduates, becomes a mortar, goes off, joins the official Marine unit. They're gearing up to deploy, obviously. And while they're getting ready to deploy, they're going through a bunch of training. And they're getting volunteers if anybody in the infantry wants to try out and be part of a scout team. Typically, this is like a voluntary only type of thing. These are going to be the best infantry guys that are volunteering to go behind enemy lines in small groups, to spy on the enemy, gather intel, do important stuff. Which, to a 5'3", 126-pound guy, he did not get the top. Sounds a lot easier than carrying this gigantic fucking base plate. So he volunteers, he makes the cut, he becomes a scout.
Do you ever think about that? Please, we are both free.
Well, I'm the one selling Be Cool cooling patches. You instantly relief from fever discomfort. Yes, Be Cool works are the very outcomes. And I actually help care. If it hurts, we help.
His truck is having trouble starting. He went to AutoZone, a friendly auto center, tests and charges his battery, all for free.
From New Connors and Ferris Podcast Studios, the attachment for annual with the Buffalo Plus Podcast, major events with
no idea where they're going. After like a month on this ship, they come over the radio and tell them they're going to be participating in the amphibious landing of Saipan. They're then briefed on the entire situation regarding Saipan. In this mid-1944, the war in the Pacific has switched. The Americans are now winning and beating back the Japanese, and the Japanese have adopted a strategy that they are going to defend Japan itself and a ring of islands around Japan. They give Japan enough space so that America won't be able to launch bombing raids on the mainland. Ideally, if they can hold these islands and prevent America from launching major bombing raids on mainland Japan, they're going to be able to rebuild their military, rebuild their navy, and get back into the fight and turn the tide in their favor. And for this Japanese defensive plan to work, they absolutely have to hold Saipan because it is one of the only islands big enough for America to land their super fortress, the B-29 bomber on top of. If America manages to take Saipan, they're going to be able to use it to launch large-scale bombing raids on mainland Japan. This is going to demoralize the Japanese people, as well as allow America to cripple their industrial capability, making it so they can't rebuild their military force. If you're not picking up what I'm putting down, I'm trying to tell you that the taking of Saipan will be the beginning of the end for the Japanese Empire. They know that. America knows that. America's got to have it. Japan can't afford to lose it. This is all out total war at this point. To make things worse and even more horrific, Japanese propaganda has persuaded the vast majority of Japanese civilians that America is the aggressor in this war. They believe that America is starting this war for no reason, and that they are quite literally cannibalistic barbarians that are coming to them, and it would be better to die fighting them than to surrender to them.
Hey, you! Wait a second. I'm not gonna eat you.
America's attack on Saipan begins on June 11, 1944, when they open up with a massive naval bombardment that goes all day and all night for 3 days straight. June 14th, the Marine Corps hits the beach, landing 8,000 men in under 20 minutes, and they are in an intense firefight trying to establish a beachhead for hours. And Guy is one of these 8,000 Marines. As he advances up the beach, he starts to see the dead bodies of Imperial Japanese soldiers, and it almost stops him in his tracks. It starts to mess with him. They look just like the Nisei. They look like his friends back home. And in that moment, he realizes he shouldn't be here. He should be back home drinking with those Russian chicks. He's got himself laying over his head. He doesn't know if he can kill people that look just like his friends. And he starts to ask himself why. Why are they still fighting? They're losing. They have to know they're losing this war, and they're going to continue to lose until it's over. All of this death is completely unnecessary. Why won't they just quit? And then, as Guy's having this existential crisis and panic attack advancing up the beach, he sees his first dead Marine. And this stops him in his tracks, quite literally standing straight up on the beach with machine gun fire flying in both directions, and he's just standing there locked in, staring at this Marine's corpse. His buddy Hurley's in a foxhole nearby, yelling at Guy, "What are you doing? Get down!" But it's all just background noise as he's locked in on this corpse. And he realizes that as much as he wants to save everybody, not everyone's going to let themselves be saved. He has to make a decision. If the Japanese quit, he needs to kill them first before they kill him or his other Marines. And with that, Hurley gets out of his foxhole and drags Guy into the foxhole with him and tells him he's fucking head. From here, Guy, Hurley, and the rest of the Marines fight for 8 hours straight to establish a 1-mile beachhead before the sun sets. By the next morning, any reservations Guy had about killing people that look like his friends are completely gone. He still wants to afford the enemy the opportunity to surrender, but if they don't take it, whatever happens next isn't his fault, it's on them. At this point, the fight has died down completely, and Guy's commanding officer, Captain Schwab, says, just keep manning the foxholes, keep looking at direction, we're going to be setting up observation posts, we're going to be sending out scouts to try to gather intel, so we can start invading further into this island. So Guy kind of sits there for a little bit, after a while he starts to get bored, he starts thinking to himself, hey, I'm just one Marine, if I slip away for a little bit, nobody will miss me, and for whatever reason, he decides he's going to slip out of the front line and into no man's land and into enemy territory. And with that, Guy is now advancing into enemy territory by himself, and nobody knows that he's gone, which is an incredibly stupid decision, but he's an 18-year-old kid, and that's what 18-year-old kids do. As he's making his way into the jungle, he comes across a Japanese trench. Inside of it is what appears to be 3 dead Japanese soldiers that have been hit by some kind of indirect fire. So he slips past that trench, and he figures, okay, obviously going to be more trenches along the same line area, and this is a defensive line. So he advances a little bit further, and then loops back around and heads back towards the Marine line. Sure enough, he comes up behind the Japanese trench with 3 very alive Japanese soldiers manning the trench, pointing towards the Marine line, not expecting anybody to come up from behind him. Guy doing exactly what he told himself he would, affording the enemy the chance to surrender. He sneaks right up to their trench before yelling in Japanese, "Turn around with your hands up." And sure enough, one of the Japanese soldiers wings around with his gun leveled at him, and Guy drops him immediately. The other 2 immediately drop their weapons and raise their hands. Guy then communicates to him in Japanese, not going to hurt you. If you surrender, let me walk you back to our line. I'm not going to have to kill you. And they agree, and that's exactly what God does. As he's walking back with the Japanese soldiers in front of him, he has them take their white undershirts off and wave them over their head as this flag of surrender. As he's walking behind them with his gun leveled at him. As he's walking, he realizes he just killed a guy. He didn't feel anything. He didn't feel pride in killing the enemy. He didn't feel remorse. He didn't feel bad. He wasn't making a decision. The other guy made the decision. He afforded him the opportunity to surrender, and he didn't take it. God was not the decision maker in the scenario. He was simply the consequences of making the wrong decision. Because of that, he felt nothing. As they approach the Marine line, they obviously get spotted as the Marines start yelling, "Holy shit, look what Guy brought in." They know it's Guy because he's the only Marine that's 5'3", bringing in 2 prisoners alive, which at this point in the war was absolutely unprecedented. The Japanese never surrendered. How in the hell did 5'3", 120-pound guy sneak behind enemy lines and convince 2 Japanese Imperial soldiers to surrender? Guy brings the prisoners in, hands them off to the chain of command. He's on cloud 9. He thinks he's the shit. He just did something awesome that almost nobody else had ever done. And then Captain Schwab comes up and starts chewing his fucking ass. Essentially saying, yeah, I'm glad it worked out. Also, that was stupid as fuck. Don't ever do that again. And if you do, I'm gonna have you court-martialed and send your ass to prison. Do not do that. Guy's kind of on his feels about it. He still feels like he did something incredible. He should be getting rewarded. Ass chewed, but again, this is how the 18-year-old kid thinks, so he's just kind of like, whatever, stay put like he told me. So for the next 2 days, Guy stays put. Both nights, the Japanese launch massive bonsai charges towards the Marine line, ultimately failing each time, resulting in hundreds, if not thousands, of dead Japanese soldiers. And the entire thing just drives Guy absolutely nuts. Why? Why are we just running straight into our machine gun fire, desperately trying to take one of us with you? It's so much unnecessary death. He just wants him to give up. So Guy decides, fuck it, I'm gonna go out on my own again. He waits till dark and then he sneaks off. He's crawling through enemy territory. He comes across a dead Marine. This Marine had the M1 carbine. Guy had been carrying the M1 brand, big, huge, heavy rifle. It's like 10 pounds. He wants a lighter, smaller carbine. He's a small guy, so he decides to swap it out. Now he's got a M1 carbine with a bunch of magazines in his pockets. From here, he keeps crawling through enemy territory. It's dark. You can't really see shit. And then he smells Japanese food. So he follows the smell of the Japanese food, and he follows it, and he follows it, and then he starts to hear muffled Japanese voices, and he follows those, and he follows those, and then he goes to the mouth of this big military dugout. At this point, it's still dark. He realizes he can't engage right now. If he does manage to take some prisoners, he's not going to be able to keep track of them in the dark, so he decides he's going to sit there, posted up, and wait until the sun comes up. From here, he finds a good hiding spot near the dugout hole where he can still listen and hear what they're talking about, and as he's listening to them that night, he hears them talking about how these stupid American devils don't understand that there's a mighty Japanese flotilla coming. It's going to reinforce the Japanese, completely wipe the Marines off the map. And Guy realizes that these Japanese soldiers aren't getting any communications. They have no idea that the Japanese Navy flotilla that they're talking about has been completely destroyed by U.S. Navy Task Force 58 in what's known as the Marianas Turkey Shoot, where we sank 3 of their aircraft carriers, a ton of their escorts, and downed hundreds of Japanese planes. That chunk of reinforcements that they're relying on doesn't even exist anymore. They have no idea. At this point, Guy realizes, okay, well, they're not going to willingly surrender because they don't understand the degree of which they're losing. In fact, they think they're winning. So he's going to have to be a little bit more persuasive when the sun comes up. So the sun comes up, he grabs himself a frag grenade, pulls the pin, lets the spoon go, counts to 3, throws in the dugout, immediately grabs another frag grenade, pulls the pin, lets the spoon go, counts to 3, throws in the dugout, grabs a smoke grenade, pulls the pin, lets go of the spoon, throws in the dugout, posts up on his rock, aimed at the dugout entrance, and starts yelling to the Japanese, come out with your hands up. And then somebody comes walking through the smoke with their hands up. Okay, good, this is great. And then another guy, okay, even better. And then another guy, okay, that's pretty good. And then another, and another, and another, and pretty soon, he's got 12 fucking Imperial Japanese soldiers standing there with his hands up, way more than he anticipated. He's got a gun with 15 bullets, 12 prisoners that probably want to kill him if they get the opportunity, and he is in way over his head. He then collects himself and is like, okay, fake it till you make it. In a stern, assertive voice tells him they're completely surrounded. If they make a move, all the Marines in the tree line that you can't see, don't look for them, they're there, I promise. If you make a move, they're all going to shoot you. Just fucking cooperate, listen to me. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to escort you back to the lines. We'll feed you. We'll take care of you. Your POWs, you're not going to be harmed. He then asks him if there's anybody else in the bunker. The Japanese soldiers bodies from the grenade blast, and he's like, okay, cool, here's the deal. Raise your hands over your head and start running that way. I'm gonna run behind you. Guy wants to get the fuck out of there before they realize that he's literally just one dude by himself. So they all take off running. Guy's running behind him with his rifle raised at him, and in a matter of minutes, they break through the jungle. They can see them on the lines. And Guy's like, oh shit, thank God, we are way closer than I thought we were. Apparently, low quality the jungle in pitch black fell with nothing but smells. Kind of makes you lose your sense of direction. They break through, they get to the lines. Guy hands off these 12 prisoners to the chain of command, and then Captain Schwab comes up and is like, Guy, what the fuck? He's like, what did I tell you? I told you if you did that again, I was gonna kill you. And here's the deal, the other 2 prisoners have been interrogated and they gave us a bunch of valuable intel that's gonna save a bunch of marine lives, and these 12 are gonna provide even more valuable intel, so I don't know what the fuck to do. The entire thing just kind of turns into like, I'm not gonna tell you to do this, but also, if you do it and you're successful, you're probably not gonna get in trouble. It's kind of the whole, I'm just gonna look for you. So now he's kind of got the green light, he goes out the next night, and now it's a whole thing. Like the Marines are having betting pools, betting on how many prisoners guys gonna bring in next, like it's March Madness. And his buddy Hurley is either crazy or he has an extreme amount of faith in his best friend, or he did the math and was like, okay, well, he catches 50 the first night, then 12, he's probably gonna catch 50 the next time. I mean, so he puts a bunch of money in the pot. The guy is gonna capture 50 enemy soldiers by himself next.
That's very interesting. How'd you come up with that guess?
Yes. I know, yes, it's not a small thing.
So, yeah.
Old Spice needs to do it. It smells of coconuts and palm trees. And it's just like a skin.
Customers bet $5, you get $258 bets if you win. Fair. Play your game. No, guy goes up. Same thing you get. Tracks down the spot where the enemy's going to be. It's right up. And there's this cave complex. Waits there all night, listens, observes. And then the dog comes, he goes out and he orders him to surrender. And at this point, he's getting dialed in. He figures out that if he goes into the caves with like the kindness and the time, it kind of demoralizes the Japanese soldiers because they're very status oriented in Japanese culture. So if they're getting talked to condescendingly, it gives them that feeling that you think they're stunned away, oh shit, why is he so confident? He must know something I don't. I must have already lost. So he's yelling into this cave in the condescending tone like, you're completely surrounded, all our guns are aimed at this cave complex. You guys have 5 minutes to come out or I'm gonna have the flamethrowers come in here and barbecue all your asses alive. He's like, he's really getting this thing dialed in. He appeals to their Bushido code of honor. He's like, look, you guys have already lost. There's no point in dying, depriving your wives and kids of a father for your code of honor. Just give it up, come out, surrender. I'm gonna feed you, I'm gonna take care of you. You're not gonna be mistreated. Just end this nonsense. And sure enough, dudes start coming out with their hands up. Not just Imperial soldiers, but some civilians too. 52 people come out of this cave complex. Guy probably internally shitting himself because he doesn't even have 50 bullets on him, more than likely he can't handle this situation. But he's got confidence and hey, fake it till you make it, right? So he's like, hey, you're completely surrounded, you're trying to think you're gonna get shot. Here's the deal, take your white undershirt off, we're gonna wave that above our head like a white flag so you don't get shot at once in the line because I'm marching an entire fucking company of people towards the line that are all Japanese. So yeah, grab your white shirts, start waving them, and we're gonna run that way. And with that, Guy brings in 52 POWs, hands them over to the chain of command, and he is essentially given the official green light to be a lone wolf going out doing his maverick shit on his own. The chain of command is now not only looking the other way, but they're basically endorsing it as much as they possibly can. And Captain Schwab gives him the nickname, the Pied Piper of Saipan. And Hurley wins the bet pool because nobody thought he was going to be bringing in more than 50 prisoners because that would be insane. Fast forward, God goes out on another solo mission, and at this point he's basically just rinse and repeat. He's got this whole thing dialed in. He goes out, finds an enemy cave or an enemy dugout, waits till the morning, calls in, hey, come out with your treat you with dignity and respect, you're honorable fighters, yada yada yada. Unfortunately, on this occasion, a single Japanese soldier comes walking out of the cave with his rifle shoulder. Guy immediately drops it and then yells back into the cave, I said come out with your hands up. Like, guys, this is simple instructions. I really need you to follow. Sure enough, 12 Japanese soldiers come out with their hands up. They start making their way back to the Marine Corps lines. Guy isn't even having them run anymore. He's just having them walk with their hands up. He's got more confidence. He knows they're not going to turn on him. He's really starting to feel like he's got the situation under control. And as they're making their way back to the Marine Corps lines, they go through this field, and in this field there's an ox tied up to a plow. And Guy instructs one of the Japanese guys, like, hey, go get a hold of that ox. Everybody else hop on the cart. And he's one Japanese guy escort the ox while he lets the guy run with a whole lot of on this trailer. And he's thinking, like, that way if they make a move, I can just unload on the trailer. They're all nice and good jets. They'll be able to take out everybody. But when he approaches the line, the Marines are all laughing their ass off because now Guy is bringing back prisoners and POWs on a fucking ox-guided cart like it's the Oregon Trail. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Everything doesn't always go according to plan. Because one of the next times he goes out, he almost dies. But he doesn't almost die from the enemy. He almost dies from the Marines. He's out in the jungle looking for enemies, and then all of a sudden he just starts taking indirect fire from artillery, mortars coming from where the Marines are. They're just blowing the entire side of this mountain. He runs, he dives in between two rocks. He's literally just huddled up in the fetal position, hiding by these rocks. There's this massive artillery barrage. It just keeps destroying the earth around him. And it just keeps going, and it keeps going. He's in the fetal position hiding for 10 hours straight while they bombard this area all night long. And somewhere during this 10 hours, it dawns on him, oh shit, if they're bombarding this much, they must have seen a ton of activity here. Even when the artillery stops, I'm probably going to be completely surrounded. I got to get the fuck out. That morning, the artillery fire stops. He hops up and is looking back towards the Marine Corps lines, and he comes up on a bunch of Japanese. Well, what's left of a bunch of Japanese are just pieces at this point, really. And there's just, anatomical confetti everywhere. And he's like, oh, that's a nice watch. That's a nice watch. Oh, they also have sake and hard candy. And he just basically, loots all these bodies for all good shit, which, is that a war crime? Kinda. Does anybody care? No, not really. Everybody's doing it in World War II. It's part of the game. So he comes back to the front lines, not with prisoners, but with a bunch of sake, so everybody's happy. And then for his next adventure, he again almost dies, and again, it's not by the enemy, it's by other Marines and a lack of communication. You see, Guy is now no longer officially working as a scout, despite the fact that that's his MLS. He's been now working with the intelligence section because, well, he's basically just going out and capturing POWs and turning it over to military intelligence. So that's who he's working with. And one of the scout platoons asked for 2 volunteers to go with him from the intelligence section. So obviously Guy and Hurley volunteered to go. Now the scouts, it's a small unit of like 8 to 12 guys. They're used to going out behind the wire together. They're used to communicating. They know how to look out for one another. They're all friends. They all know each other. And Guy and Hurley are the 2 guys that kind of tagging along. So in the dark at night, the scouts aren't really paying attention because they're not used to having stragglers that don't know what they're doing and don't know how to keep up with them. And they end up losing the scouts in the middle of the night. And it's just kind of Hurley and they're lost. So they try to catch back up and find the scouts, but they're not able to do it. The scouts, they're sneaky. That's the whole point. So Hurley's like, well, let's just head back to the Marine Corps line. And Guy's like, no, absolutely not. Everybody's going to think that we're cowards and we get out of the scout mission. So we're just going to go look and try to find some more POWs and keep trying to find the scouts for a couple hours. Because that's what they do. They're roaming around the jungle at night looking for the scouts. And eventually they're like, okay, fuck it. We'll go back in the line. Nobody's going to think we're a coward at this point. So they head back to the line. It's still dark out. And, this is a bigger mission with more people involved. So it's a little bit more coordinated. And there's a password for going out behind the wire. The password tonight was to yell cities. And then the line was going to respond back with the name of a U.S. city. And then they were supposed to respond back with another name of another U.S. city. So they kind of approach the line. They yell out cities. And the Marines just start opening up with machine gun fire. They duck into a foxhole and take cover. And they're like, what the fuck is going on? The fire finally dies down and they yell out again, cities. The Marines open up fire again. Guy and Hurley don't realize this in the moment, but the scouts had already returned and they had used that password, and the guards knew that there was only one unit out there that could use the password. So the guards, in their mind, I think the Japanese were trailing the scouts. They heard what the password was, and now they're trying to take advantage of it to sneak up on the Marines. But Guy doesn't know that yet, but he does know that yelling cities isn't working. So he just yells out in perfect English, we're Marines, stop shooting. The Marines on guard then yell out, "What's the password?" And Guy, in a stroke of brilliance, yells out the name of the U.S. city. But he picks a very particular city because he knows that a Japanese soldier isn't going to be able to say it correctly, and that's going to signal to the Marines, oh shit, they're actually Americans. So Guy yells out, Honolulu, knowing that a Japanese person trying to copy English would pronounce it Honolulu. And with that, they're let back into the Marine lines without getting shot at. Oh, you can't say that. That was kind of racist. Look, first of all, I'm just repeating history. This is what happened. That's not my fault. Secondly, if you own a pair of Lululemons and you've never been to a mall of a Lululemon store and that didn't offend you, shut up. Go ahead and Google why Lululemon is called Lululemon and get back to me with the racism bullshit. So here's the battle cycling is progressing, and day by day, the Marines are taking over more and more of the island. And with that, Guy kind of abandons his original protocol of waiting. And he just starts going out during the day, he starts going out at night. Whenever he captures a group of prisoners, he brings them in, and then if he's still got time left in the day or time left at night, and he doesn't need sleep or food, he just goes right back out again and captures even more prisoners. And as this continues to go on, he kind of becomes more and more of a renegade. He quits wearing his Marine Corps cap and he starts wearing just a normal baseball cap. He quits wearing his Marine Corps boots and starts wearing boots that he took off of a Japanese soldier. His reason for that is, I guess, when it hits the ground, it's going to sound the same as though while the native Japanese. He starts painting the medals off of Japanese and he captures the kills and put him on his own uniform because he feels that he's earned it because he beat them in battle. He's really growing into that Pied Piper mythical persona, but nobody really says anything to the guy because he's so overwhelmingly effective. I mean, every single person that he brings back is A, a person, but it's an A or not, it's a person that he saved, and B, he probably saved at least one Marine because that guy was going to kill a Marine. So he's saving a ton of lives and people just kind of let him do whatever the fuck he wants. And as he keeps going out on this mission, he keeps acquiring cool shit. He's got some Japanese officer katanas. He's got a Japanese officer pistol that he keeps on the side as like his trade out. He's got all kinds of cool Japanese flags. He has all of these war trophies that just round upon today that in World War II was completely normal. And some of the other Marines start getting a little bit jealous. They want cool shit too. So he starts bringing out Marines with him on these missions. Usually only one guy at a time. On one occasion, his best buddy goes out with him because he wants a sword. Hurley goes out on one mission. It was pretty protocol standard for Buck. Hurley thought it was absolutely crazy. He felt like he almost died. He vowed to never go out on a mission with Guy ever again. On a couple of occasions, he took out Captain Schaub on missions because Schaub, he wanted to see what was going on. He's been in the Marine Corps longer than Guy has. He was a veteran of Canada. He'd never seen an Imperial Japanese soldier willingly surrender that wasn't like seriously wounded on the battlefield, like scooping on the field. Like he couldn't understand. He wanted to see it for himself. So they go into this cave. Guys yell some shit into the cave in Japanese, and Captain Schaub's like, "What'd you tell him?" And he's like, "I told him I was gonna blow him the fuck up if they didn't come out here with their hands up." And he's like, "Huh." Well, that worked, and then they brought back a bunch more prisoners, and they just keep doing it. On another mission, Guy goes out on his own. He's making his way through these sugarcane fields, and then he comes up onto the farmhouse that all these sugarcane fields belong to. And as he's sneaking through these sugarcane fields, he gets a view of the front of the house. And sitting out in front of the house is a brand new Harley. It's not really a conventional motorcycle. It's like a three-wheeler with a little cart thing on the back to haul shit, but it's a Harley nonetheless. And Guy loves riding his motorcycle back home. He wants this Harley. And at first, he can't believe it. Like, what is an American-made motorcycle doing here? And I thought that was weird too. And I tried to figure out why or how an American-made motorcycle would be getting used by the Japanese military. And apparently, during the Great Depression, Harley was struggling. So they actually gave out a licensing agreement to Japanese companies so that Japanese companies could recreate their own version of a Harley, and then they would manufacture in China. They were very popular in the 1930s, and they were used by the Japanese military all through World War II. So to be fair, it's technically not a legitimate Harley made by Harley here in the U.S., but it is Harley's design manufactured by a Japanese company. It's the closest thing he's going to get to a Harley. Not really believing it's a Harley at first. He starts creeping closer and closer towards this farmhouse. He's like 200 yards away. He gets closer and gets closer. He's like 150 yards away, and he's like, "That's for sure a Harley. I know what a Harley looks like. That's a fucking Harley. Not only is that a Harley, that's my Harley. I'm taking that shit." But obviously, there's military people inside this farmhouse. He needs to case the place first. So he starts working his way through the sugarcane fields around this farmhouse, getting a good 360 view, and figuring out everything that's going on. It takes him like 30 minutes to creep through this sugarcane field, getting a good 360 layout of this farmhouse. And the entire time he's just thinking to himself, like, I'm going to be the first American on Saipan to have a Harley. This is going to be absolute blast. As the front of the farmhouse and the Harley comes back into view, now there's 3 Japanese soldiers outside standing by his motorcycle. And at this point, he's like, fuck, okay, they're not going to surrender. It's broad daylight. They can clearly see that I don't have them surrounded. This isn't like normal where I have them cornered in a cave and I get to soften them up with grenades or smoke grenades. Like, this is literally just a full-on, straight-up 1v3 fight. I can't bullshit my way through this. He's like 30 yards away from these guys, hiding in the sugarcane field, just watching them. He's thinking to himself, like, I should not have swapped out my M1 Grand for this M1 carbine. The M1 carbine, significantly smaller bullet. You have to shoot a man 2-3 times to put him down, or you got to hit him in the exact right spot. It's not like the M1 Grand, which is a high-powered hunting rifle, chambered in 30-06, where you hit somebody and fucking drop. So at this point, he's kicking himself for giving up his M1 Grand. On top of that, he's not a great shot, and he knows he's not a great shot. Barely qualified with his rifle in basic training. So he's just sitting in the sugarcane field weighing his options, and he's like, okay, I can just make a clean getaway. But the reasons I don't want to do that is A, if I let these guys go, they're going to go on to kill more Marines, and B, I want this fucking motorcycle. But then, as he's watching these three guys, one of them decides that they're going to sit on top of the motorcycle. And in Guy's own words, and I quote, I don't like that. He then immediately jumps up, fires around straight at that guy's head, makes him get that hit, and then mags the other two as he's walking towards them, dropping all three of them in a surprise attack. As he's running out for his bike to make sure all three of these guys are dead, he reloads his carbine, hops on the bike. He's not worried about it being movie trap because the other guy was just sitting on it, and he fucking takes off. He's in a hurry, doesn't know if there's more soldiers in that farmhouse or not. He's not sticking around to find out, so he peels off. Distance between him and that farmhouse, finds some cover, pulls over real quick, pops his pump off, pulls his right up, throws the pump back on, and then continues driving back to the base. As he gets within eyesight of the Marine Corps lines, he's driving one-handed, waving his white skinny shirt over his head so they don't shoot him. He makes it into the base, and everybody's like blown away. Guy has a fucking Harley in Japan. Everybody's coming up and talking to him. They're checking out the motorcycle like this is the big event for the day. Like this is the cool thing that's going to happen today. And then, after a little while, some major comes up. Like, everybody on the bike, we need it over at headquarters. And they just straight up confiscate the guy's motorcycle. He tries to argue with the major. Major's not having it. He outranks him. Go fuck yourself. You're a private first class. I'm a major. I'm taking this motorcycle. It's mine. So in the moment, guy's pissed off. He wanted that bike. But in hindsight, later in life, he did say it was probably all for the best because he was a young guy. Right that Harley through enemy territory probably would have gotten killed. And at the end of the day, he's just happy to be the first American on Saipan to ever have a Harley. All the events that we talked about have all unfolded in a matter of like a couple of weeks. The battle cycle only goes from June 14th to July 9th. By early July, the Marines had taken over most of the island, and it was very clear to everybody on the island that the Marines were going to take the entire thing. Because of that, both the Japanese soldiers and the Japanese civilians were more and more desperate, and it turns into one of the most brutal and horrific events that I've ever looked at. Remember, as I stated earlier, because of Japanese propaganda, a significant portion of the Japanese population truly believes that America is cannibalistic barbarians that will do horrible, unspeakable things to them if they are captured. And it is better to die fighting the Americans or to just die than be captured. Because of this, as Guy continues to clear more caves, there's an increasing number of civilians that sometimes they surrender with the Japanese soldiers, sometimes he comes across caves with no Japanese soldiers and he convinces them to surrender. But on other occasions, there's caves where they don't surrender and he ends up throwing his grenades into the caves and he ends up killing civilians. More often than not, they were all holding guns, ready to fight them to the death, and he just didn't have an option. On one occasion, he approaches the cave and he goes into the cave, come out, surrender, we're not going to hurt you, yada, yada, yada. And an elderly man and an elderly woman, a couple, like in their 60s, walk in, grandparents, and they're standing there, and the old man has a grenade in his hand, with his hand on the pin, and the guy tells him to drop the grenade, and the old man just looks at him, pulls the As the Marines progressed and took the island, obviously they were taking cities and small villages, and Guy was going with these larger military movements, doing everything he could to try to convince people to surrender and not have to get killed by the Marines. Like, don't fight, just give up, please. And what would happen more often than not when they came to a village was once it became clear that the Marines were going to win, and people truly believed that the Marines were going to do horrible things when they were captured, some of the soldiers and a lot of the civilians, rather than being captured, would run to nearby cliffs and jump off, thinking that would be another death. Now, obviously, this is absolutely horrible for anybody that has to witness this. Nobody wants that to happen, but the guy, it was especially traumatic because he was the only Marine there that could understand Japanese and hear what these people were saying. As him, the Marines are begging and pleading these people not to jump off these cliffs, the guy can actually hear and understand children begging their parents not to kill them because they don't understand, they don't know the Japanese propaganda, they don't understand why their parents are about to hurl them off the cliff. I have to just sit there and witness it. There's nothing we can do. On July 6, 1944, Guy goes on a really solo mission. He sneaks out into the jungle. It's an overnight mission. He doesn't really find anybody during the day. And he's in an area that today is known as Markai Point or the Bonsai Cliffs. Guy had no idea that this was actually the hottest area in Saipan at this point in time. And General Saito, the Japanese general remaining on the island, had ordered all of his remaining forces, almost 5,000 Japanese soldiers, that they were going to die with honor, and they were all ordered to launch bonsai attacks and kill 7 Americans with them before they died. It was Japan's last ditch effort to maintain control of the island. By the next morning, July 2nd, all of these bonsai attacks had commenced, and Guy was behind enemy lines, surrounded by thousands of enemy soldiers, and had no other option but to climb to a high vantage point and watch this intense battle unfold. The Marines did the casualties, but it's nothing compared to what the Japanese experienced. The Japanese were just running head-on into the Marine machine gun fire, dying at a rate of 8-1 for that of the Marines. Over 4,500 Japanese soldiers died that day conducting these bonsai charges. Guy stays out all day and all night again because he's behind enemy lines, completely surrounded. He's scared to move, so he just stays overnight again. And on the morning of July 8th, he starts making his way back towards the lines, and he runs into a grenade that has some Japanese soldiers that can survive the bonsai attacks in there. He's kind of thinking, maybe they're going to be willing to surrender. They just suffered tremendous casualties. They know the shit is up. The game is over. I can still save some of these guys. He ends up finding 2 Japanese soldiers that survived the battle and convinces them to surrender. And as he's talking to him, he's like, is there anybody else that you know of in the area that you want to go talk to and get them to surrender to so you guys don't get killed when the Marines come through here with their flamethrowers and their grenades because they're going to be clearing out every single cave. The soldiers tell him they are aware of a bunch of other survivors, and one of them volunteers to go and talk to those survivors and see if they're willing to surrender. The other one stays back with God. While the first guy is gone, he ends up talking to this Japanese soldier kind of casually, and it's like, you know, how come you didn't volunteer to go with them? He's like, well, because if I can't convince them to surrender, they're going to kill me for trying to get them to surrender. At this point, guys kind of shit his pants because he's like, okay, well, A, either this guy legitimately is willing to risk his life to get these people to surrender, or B, probably more likely, he just used it as an excuse to get away. He's going to come back with more Japanese soldiers, and they're going to kill him. But he figures, fuck it, I'm committed now, so he just kind of waits. And after a little while, 12 Japanese soldiers come walking up, not with their hands raised, but holding rifles. They're not pointed at him, but they're still holding rifles. Shit has officially hit the fan. The officer in charge of the soldiers starts talking to Guy, and Guy kind of realizes, like, okay, this guy's potentially opening to surrender. I just need to convince him. And Guy plays the entire thing perfectly. He lies his fucking ass off. He basically tells his officer, you know, please sit down, which in Japanese culture, like, kind of makes him the authority figure, like he's been sent there to negotiate. And he informs his officer, like, General Howard Matt Smith, my shogun, sent me here because he was so impressed with how valiantly you guys fought the battle yesterday. He doesn't want to kill such great warriors in caves like Vernon. He believes that you deserve an honorable life, and he wants you to surrender to him, and when the war is over, he will honorably return you to Japan to live with your people. At this point, the officer's quiet. He's thinking. Guy knows he's right on the verge of actually pulling this shit off, so he pulls out his cigarettes, offers the officer one. He accepts the cigarette. Guy lights it for him. He takes a couple of drags. The officer's like, "Do you have a doctors? I have a lot of wounded people." Guy is like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna pull this off." He's not thinking about his honor and his Bushido code. And I'm like, "Oh shit." He's thinking about all the people that he can save too, and he realizes he's gonna close his deal. The guy's like, "Yes, absolutely. We have medicine. We have doctors. If you guys surrender, I can take care of it." And with that, the officer takes one last big drag of the cigarette and says, "So be it. I'm your prisoner." The officer then orders some of the soldiers to return back to where they came from and order everybody to come out. They surrender. They're going to start getting evacuated back to the Marine Corps base. 30 minutes, lines and lines of people start showing up. Lines so long that God can't see the end of it. He's shitting his pants. Like, holy fuck, how many people are there? At this point, he's dropped his weapon. It doesn't matter anymore. He can't take all these people even if he tried. He doesn't even have enough bullets. If they want to kill him, he's dead. So he's just doing everything he can. He's trying to split up the military personnel and the civilians. He's telling the soldiers to get their white skinny shirts ready to leave surrender. He's trying to do everything he can for the wounded with the medical supplies that he does have. And the officer is getting more and more impatient because he wants the people that are severely wounded to start getting medical treatment right away. The guy doesn't have a radio. There's no way to communicate back that he needs help. And as the officer's temper is getting shorter and shorter, and guys start to get that feeling in the pit of the stomach, like this guy's going to change his mind and just kill me. The Japanese soldiers start yelling, Marines, Marines. Off in the distance, there's a Marine unit approaching, and guy immediately tells them to start waving their white shirts, and the Marines see it, and they start making their way directly towards Guy. There's a bunch of Marines coming on foot, but there's a Jeep that makes it to Guy first, and he tells the guys on the Jeep, here, take as many of these wounded as you can straight to sick bay, tell them we have a bunch of people surrendering, I need more backup to help get all these people out of here. Within 30 minutes, 100 Marines show up and start helping them process all these prisoners and start getting them all back to the line. Once everything's good and going, Guy's just like, fuck this, I'm out. And he heads back to the base. He's been out for almost 3 days straight, hasn't slept, it's been the most stressful time of his life. Goes straight to his cot, eats some food, and passes out. Next morning, Guy wakes up and Captain Shaw meets him and tells Guy that he just negotiated the surrender of over 800 Japanese prisoners.
Crispy onions, and just fries for me. The new Ford Frontier is elevated with power and style. With 2 locations, Basil Ford is just minutes away from anywhere in Western New York with the inventory to fit your needs. Basil Ford in Chicago and Basil Ford of Niagara Falls. Experience the power of 2 locations, 1 great brand. Basil Ford. Shop right now at basilford.com or basilfordofniagarafalls.com.
With that, by July 11th, the Battle of Saipan comes to an end. There's still going to be skirmishes or pockets of resistance of small Japanese units that refuse to surrender that are willing to fight to the death, but the official battle itself is ended, and the main component of the action that will this Japanese military has been completely dismantled. And from here, Guy gets sent over to the next island known as Kinney. And for Guy, at this point, it's pretty much the same exact thing, rinse and repeat, the same thing he was doing over in Saipan. Find Japanese holdouts, convince them to surrender, bring them in. While he's on Kinney, and he actually brings in 154 more POWs. It's pretty much the same thing, not much stands out, but there is one instance that stands out. Guy finds himself at the mouth of this cave. He knows there's Japanese people in there. He yells in, gives his spiel, come out, surrender. I'm not going to hurt you. I'll take care of you. There's no point dying for your honor. Yada, yada, yada. He gives him 3 to 5 minutes. Nothing really happens. Okay, do this to yourself. He grabs his grenade, gets his finger on the pin, gets ready to pull it. And as his finger's on the pin, he hears a child crying inside the cave. So he puts his grenade back and he can't do it. He's seen too many dead kids already. These kids are truly 100% victims in all of this. I mean, there's civilians that are fighting, refusing to surrender. They're victims, but nowhere near to the degree that these innocent kids are. These kids don't even comprehend what's going on. Guy has no idea what the situation is at this game. He could be in there with Japanese soldiers that are refusing to let them come out here and surrender, and that's not the kid's fault. And he just can't kill them. But he also knows that he can't let them leave that cave and have those soldiers come out and have an opportunity to kill one when he gets in the future. So he doesn't know what to do. He's just sitting in the mouth of this cave, weighing his options. After a couple minutes, an elderly woman in her 60s comes out, shaken like a leaf. She's absolutely horrified. And Guy, tries to console her, like, hey, I'm not going to hurt you. Just what's going on? I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to feed you. You're going to be safe. And the old woman is just begging him, please don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. He's like, I'm not. Is there anybody else in the camp? And she says there were Japanese soldiers, but they left this morning and haven't come back. Right now, it's just her and her 10-year-old granddaughter inside of this cave. And Guy is like, okay, have her come out and I'll bring you guys back to camp, get you food, medical attention, whatever you need. So grandma goes inside the cave, comes back out with the 10-year-old granddaughter. The granddaughter is crying. She's inconsolable. inconsolable. The grandmother tells him, you know, this is my granddaughter, Michiko. Her father died a couple of days ago in the battle. He wasn't a soldier, he was just a sugarcane farmer. We've been living here for a couple of years. We came here from mainland Japan, and we've been living here. We just got caught up in this battle. Guy feels horrible for the little girl. You know, dad just died. He doesn't know what to do, so he just starts bringing him back to the Marine Corps logins to the POW camp and ends up dropping him off. 2 days later, him and Hurley go out on another mission. They find him in a cave. Inside, there's 2 guys. One's a soldier. The other one appears to be a soldier, but he's not in uniform, so guy still thinks he might be a soldier. They convince him to surrender. They take him back to the Marine Corps lines, and they end up interrogating him, trying to get whatever intel they can. And Guy is there interrogating the guy that's in civilian clothing because he wants to prove that this guy's actually a soldier, so they know. And during the interrogation, he ends up telling Guy that he's not a soldier. He just came here from mainland Japan to find sugarcane, and he starts begging Guy, like, look, I'm not trying to fight you guys. I don't want to hurt any Americans. Just let me go. I promise I'll come back. I have to go try to find my mother and my daughter. They're out there somewhere. And the light bulb goes off in Guy's head, like, there's no fucking way. And he looks at the guy, he's like, what's your daughter's name? And he says, Michiko. And he goes, I know where your daughter is. He immediately runs across camp, finds Captain Shop, tells him everything about the situation. Captain Shop's like, go, take a jeep, take him to the POW camp right now, find their daughter. So they get to the POW camp, Guy explains the situation to the guard. He goes and grabs his commanding officer. Guy explains the situation. The commanding officer's like, bro, I've got thousands of people here. We're just trying to get everybody fed and keep them warm. I'm not keeping track of like names. I have no idea where this person is. They're somewhere inside the camp. If you want to go find them, knock yourself out. So they're walking to this POW camp for a while, and finally Michiko actually sees them first and starts yelling in Japanese, father, runs up and hugs her dad. They're crying. They're hugging Guy. Guy's hugging them. Everybody's crying. It's just this perfect moment where finally something good has happened on this godforsaken island. They finish up. Guy says their goodbyes. Michiko gives him one last hug and says in Japanese, thank you, Mr. Marine. Thank you. And with that, Guy sets off to get back. They get back to camp. Captain Shaw calls out his intelligence crew. He's like, okay, here's the deal. Promotions are finally come through. Everybody's getting their promotions tonight. We're giving out awards, medals. One of you has earned a very high-ranking award. Everybody kind of looks down the line of Guy. Like, obviously, he's getting the award. Rumor is it's going to be the Medal of Honor. He's pumped. Going to be a great time. A couple hours later, he calls him back into formation. They start handing out rank. So they go to hand out the rank first. Guy does not get a promotion. Guy should be getting a promotion just based off of how long he's been in the theater alone, not including all the extraordinary shit he's done. What the fuck is going on? He's already getting kind of pissed in the back of his mind. He's like, maybe it's okay. Maybe they're about to give him the Medal of Honor and they're going to give him the rank at the same time. That makes sense, right? So they start giving out awards, and Captain Shaw did put Guy in for the Medal of Honor. He wrote the whole thing up, sent it up the chain of command, and they bumped it down to a Silver Star. So Guy is awarded a Silver Star, not the Medal of Honor, and he receives no rank. There's no way around it. Guy is absolutely pissed off. I mean, Alvin York earned the Medal of Honor when he captured 132 POWs. Guy has captured over 800 in a single day, and his total is well over 1,000.
See, that's bullshit.
In his mind, there's absolutely no reason he shouldn't be a sergeant or higher and have the Medal of Honor. The only thing he can come up with is that it's because of his race. And to be fair, that's a strong possibility. As I said, the Marine Corps was 100% white until 1941. He was one of the first non-white Marines, and the higher you go up that command structure, the older those guys are. I mean, the high-ranking Marines at this point in time fought in World War I. Presumably, they were more racist than the younger generation, so it would make it extremely hard for things like rank and medals to be awarded to somebody that was Hispanic with a Hispanic name. That personally, I think, would play a role, but the part that he's not really considering is that while he was